have some folks listening online with us this morning. If you can get in the chat, let us know that you hear us, okay? Amazing. To this windows. Sorry, if you want to do yourself, just something I knew and sounds good.
You get it.
Yes. I mean,
Good morning, can everybody hear me? Great, fantastic. Just like a bunch of educators, like that small response. So, sure that you all enjoy that for potential students. Okay, it's gonna be right one minute. My name is Dave Adam. I have the great pleasure of being the Wheatley County Mayor. Here in Wheatley County, we're glad to have you all this morning. I have been county mayor now starting my third term since 2014, and I'm doing this work. And so it's been a great job. And I get to, because of that, I get to do things like this and serve as the MC for you all today. I think that this is especially important work and especially important conversation all the time, but especially in today's environment where we understand that education is vitally important, but how we interact with our young students, those that oftentimes come to the local school system in certain situations is really important when we look at future success and how we get students on grade level reading, or how we get students engaged in CTE programs in middle school and high school, and then how we get those former students into the workforce. And so thank you all for being with us today as we tackle some of these important issues. So first, let me go just real briefly through the agenda. I know you all got a copy of the agenda this morning, but real briefly, after I do some introductions, then we're going to get into some policy priorities with the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. Then we are going to have a speaker that deals with mental health in the post-pandemic world, something that I know that we all are dealing with. Then we've got an all-star panel of child and health panel that I think you all will really enjoy. We'll take a small break. Then we're going to hear an update about the Bright Start West Tennessee initiative that we have through the United Way of West Tennessee organization. Then we will get to hear from a legislator and get a legislative update around all things education. And then finally, we'll close out with a presentation from Blue Oval City. And so a really great morning with you all today. And excited to hear more from each of our speakers this morning. So as we look at this work, some of the most important pieces outside of you all and the work that you all are doing, and then outside of really the highest priority is the children that we are serving, are those policymakers that are helping or at times hindering the work that you all are so vitally engaged in. But we do want to take some time to just recognize, and while many of them are not with us this morning due to obligations to other parts of the state and the country, we do just want to highlight those legislative partners and want you take a look at them so that if you see them out, we can have a conversation both positive and as somebody who deals in that world negative. And so first I want to introduce our U.S. legislators representing Tennessee in the United States Senate, Senator Martha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty. Am I supposed to be a name person? Okay. Oh, that's me. Boy, I used to look really young. That just shows you like this kind of anyways. Senator Marshall Blackburn, and Senator Bill Patrick. Representing this part of the state in the Tennessee House of Representatives would be Congressman Mark Green, Congressman David Peskov, and Congressman Steve Cohen. Tennessee legislators representing the Shelby County area in the Tennessee Senate are Senator Ramesh Akbari, Senator Sarah Powell, Senator Brent Taylor, and Senator London Lamar. Legislators representing West Tennessee in the Tennessee Senate outside of Shelby County, Senator Paul Rose in District 32, representing Lauderdale, Tipton, and parts of Shelby County. Senator John Stevens in District 24, representing Benton, Carroll, Gibson, Henry, Devine, Wheatley, Houston, and Stewart. Senator Ed Jackson, District 25, representing Madison, Crockett, Dyer, Lake, Decatur, Henderson, and Cary. And Senator Paige Wally in District 26, representing Chester, Fayette, Hardeman, Hardin, Haywood, Lawrence, McNairy, and Wayne counties. Legislators representing Shelby County in the Tennessee House of Representatives, Representative Mark White, Representative Joe Towns Jr., Representative Jesse Chisholm, Representative Justin Pearson, Representative Karen Camper, Representative Larry Miller, Representative Tori Harris, and Representative G.A. Hardaway. Representative Kevin Vaughn, Representative Dwayne Thompson, Representative John Gillespie, Representative Antonio Parkinson, and Representative Tom Levitt. That's all of the representatives representing Shelby County. The Tennessee House of Representatives representing those districts outside of Shelby County, District 71, are Representative Kip Capley. Kip represents parts of Hardin, Wayne, Lawrence, and Maury County. Representative Kurt Paston, representing District 72, Chester, Decatur, and parts of Hardin, Perry, and Henderson counties. Representative Chris Todd, who represents parts of Madison County, and then Representative Jay Reedy, representing parts of Benton, Henry, Houston, Humphreys, and Stewart County. We'll hear from Representative Katie Darby today, who represents Wheatley and parts of Carroll and Henry counties in the 76th district. Representative Rusty Greers, representing Dyer, Lake, and parts of Obion County. Representing District 79 is Representative Brock Martin, representing Gibson and parts of Carroll and Henderson County. Representative Johnny Shaw from District 80, who represents Hardeman, Haywood, and parts of Madison County. Deborah Moody, who represents District 81, which is Tipton and parts of Haywood County. Representative Chris Hurt, who represents District 82, Crockett, parts of Gibson and Obion counties, and Lauderdale. And finally, Representative Brian Gant, representing District 894, which is Haywood, McNairy, and Hardeman. So let's give all of these legislators a big round of applause for the work. All right, so I'm fixing to step away, and I know you all are all proud for that. As part of our first presentation this morning, we offer an overview of this year's policy priorities for the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. Providing that summary will be TCCY's own Kylie Graves, who serves as their policy specialist. Kylie received her bachelor's degree in social entrepreneurship with a focus on contemporary social issues from Belmont University. She went on to receive a master's in science and social work from the University of Tennessee with a focus on public policy. She works with the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth since 2020 and is currently their policy specialist, working on developing reports around child well-being and partnering with the General Assembly to improve outcomes for children across the state. She is also the director of the Second Look Commission, which reviews cases for children who have experienced a second or subsequent instance of severe abuse. She's thankful for the opportunity to advocate for improving the well-being of Tennessee's children. Join me in welcoming Kylie Graves to the stage this morning.
Y'all. So we're going to go over, as we mentioned, we do several reports that we do the state of the child, and that's really outlines the data in the back for the policies that we'll be looking at over the coming session and the coming year. And so we are going to get into the state of the child. So the report itself is both required by our statute in TCA. So it's mandated that we do a report annually about child well-being, a comprehensive look at how children are doing across the state. And then additionally, we are the Annie Foundation's Kids Count partner. So part of our partnership with the Annie Casey Foundation is the production of this report. And so the purpose of this report is to provide a snapshot of child well-being across the state. It is a short, broad array of topics, kind of an introduction, and then leads you into diving into more detail if there's certain sections that interest you. And then additionally, we use it as a resource for communities, grant funding, and policymakers. And so one of the interesting positions with TCCY is that we don't provide any direct services ourselves, and we don't do any direct data collection ourselves either. So we really rely pretty heavily on already public data sources. So in this graph, it's really hard to see now that I'm looking at it, the text is really small. But all of the blue shading is government sources, whether that's state departments, federal departments. We rely really heavily on the American Community Survey by the Census Bureau, as well as the National Survey on Children's Health. And then in the green, we rely on researcher journal studies, as well as NGO partners, things like Human Trafficking Hotline, Blair Project, T2EE, National Conference, state legislatures. So that's where we get our information from. And then in this year's report, we talked about demographics. We'll look at special topics. So those are things that TCCY is investing in and diving into. A couple of those things are we're really looking at building resilience among our communities and resilient infrastructure. And we'll get into that. Another thing that we're really excited about is family-friendly workplaces. We've established a partnership with a group from Texas that allows businesses to become designated as the best place for working. And so we're moving forward with that, which is really exciting. And then also looking at transition age youth and the impact of the pandemic. And then we also look at economics, education, health, and child welfare and youth justice. So diving into some of the information that you see, when we talk about adversity in this report, we're using information from the National Survey of Children's Health. So these are not the typical 10 ACEs that you think of. It's a little bit different. So National Survey on Children's Health is filled out by the householder on behalf of the child living there. So it doesn't exactly match up with the ACEs survey where it's filled out by someone at the middle reflecting back on their experiences under 18. And because of that, as a parent filling out, they omitted questions about abuse and neglect and substituted those for more community-based adversity, like violence, discrimination, and things of that nature. But what we found was that children in Tennessee report a higher level of adversity than their counterparts across the country, with 41% of Tennessee children having at least one adverse experience. And then additionally, we see a really big change when it comes to those looking at it in reflection of the poverty line. So 1 in 3 children below the poverty line in Tennessee had 2 or more of those adverse experiences, compared to 1 in 12 of children living at 400 FPL or higher. And then we talk about resilient infrastructure. So looking at, do children live in neighborhoods where they have the opportunity to engage their community and build those critical resources that we know are so important to mitigate those adverse experiences that we just looked at. And what we found was really interesting, the survey asked, does this child live in a community that has a park, recreation center, sidewalk, or library? And the largest percent of Tennessee children, 25%, lived in a neighborhood that had access to none of those amenities. And then the second largest group, closely behind that at 22.6, lived in a neighborhood that had all 4 of those. So really looking at that disparate outcome when such large groups have such different experiences. When we look at the impact of COVID on mental health, the majority of United States teens felt that the pandemic had a little or some negative impact on their mental health. Particularly the older age groups are where we saw some of a larger impact. And then what we saw though was that the pandemic had an outsized effect on teens who were already struggling with their mental health prior to the pandemic. So we're looking at the percentage of teens reporting that the pandemic had quite a bit or a lot of a negative impact on their mental health. And what we found was that among those who have no past year major depressive episodes, they only reported 13%. When we go to a past year major depressive episode, it was 49%. And then when we look at severe major depressive episodes over the last year, that increased to 55%. So really looking at how the pandemic impacted those who were already having challenges. Next, we look at poverty. And as we've talked about poverty a lot, we've noticed a lot of confusion on what is included when we talk about poverty and what is not. So there's two measures that we use. We use the official poverty measure. That was originally calculated in 1963. It was the cost of a basic food diet in 1963 multiplied by 3. Calculation hasn't changed since then, other than updating for food items. So that's how they calculate poverty. And what is included in a household income is just gross before tax cash income. And so where the confusion comes is within the past 2 years, there's been a lot of federal public aid, pandemic aid, things like child tax credits, stimulus payments, all of those. None of those are calculated into the official poverty measure. That is not impacting the poverty measure. The only pandemic specific program that would be calculated into the official poverty measure is the expanded unemployment benefits, because those were taxed and considered cash income. So that's where we would see any change reflective of the pandemic. And then you see the supplemental poverty measure that was calculated in 2010. And so that is a little bit more broad, both in terms of family, defines family and household in a broader spectrum, including any foster care or foster children or adopted children in there, or foster children or non-biological children there. And then additionally, it has a more broad definition of expenses for households, including things like transportation and other costs, clothing, shelter, utilities. And then they also will include those non-cash benefits that we just talked about. So things like the child tax credit and stimulus payments. So looking at just the child poverty for official poverty measure, what we saw was that Tennessee had a really significant decline in child poverty. 8% of overall child poverty under 18 declined by 8% between 2019 and 2021. And then under 5, which is the largest group historically in poverty and those most affected by poverty, decreased by 18% in those 2 years. We saw a particular decline in our rural counties, with Bledsoe leading at a 28.8% decline. And this is largely attributed to wage growth. Bledsoe in 2019, their average weekly wage was $674. In 2021, that was $828. So we saw about an $8,000 a year increase in straight wages. Over the decade, poverty declined nationally. Nationally, over these 2 years, we didn't see a decline. So Tennessee kind of stood for this. Looking at the supplemental poverty measure, which is where we take into account all of those benefits, we saw 1 in 8 children in 2019 were under the supplemental poverty measure. And in 2021, that had changed to 1 in 20. So it's a huge drop. We saw that the child tax credit lifted 2.9 million children out of poverty. The third stimulus payment lifted 2.27. Ongoing programs like SNAP, housing subsidies, school lunch for unemployment lifted several 100,000 children out of poverty. What we will see in this coming year is that 1 in 20 is going to shoot back up, because these programs won't be as in effect. So we're going to expect a pretty substantial increase in the number of kids living in poverty under that poverty measure. Looking at access to support services in schools, 50% of school districts had 0 or 1 psychological professionals on staff. In 2021-22 school year, public school districts employed 459 social workers. The average daily attendance for that previous year was about 909,000 students. It's quite a lot. When we look at public school students receiving specialized education services, the largest group are receiving services for a speech or language impairment or a learning disability. But this is how they break out for the last year. When we look at access to care and overall health for our youth, what we've seen reflective of the pandemic is a decline in on-time vaccinations for our youth over the last 2 years, likely reflective of those missed well-child visits during the pandemic. Sometimes when you miss those, people just don't reschedule them. So getting people back in front of their pediatrician to get those vaccinations is critical. 1 in 4 Tennessee children have a mental behavioral, emotional, or developmental disorder. We talk a lot about the importance of Medicaid expansion. Children are more likely to be covered when their parents are covered, or to participate in healthcare like those well-child visits when their parent is covered as well and involved in the healthcare system. We've long advocated for continuous eligibility. Tennessee currently has continuous eligibility for our Cover Kids program. So that means that kids are continuously enrolled for 12 months and they aren't losing coverage for temporary fluctuations in income. We don't have that for kids who are covered by TennCare. Typically, people who are in the lowest income brackets experience the most income fluctuation and changes because of things like shifting hours, overtime, things like that. And so we've long advocated for continuous eligibility for TennCare kids as well. We're very excited that when the federal omnibus bill passed, it will be a requirement for states to expand Medicaid coverage for continuous eligibility for children starting in January of 2024. We know the governor included that in his State of the Child and budget, so they're planning for that. Not sure if they'll implement that prior to the federal date, but at least by January 2024, all of our kids on TennCare will have continuous eligibility. And then additionally talking about the public health emergency expiration. So as the public health emergency is expiring, coming soon, TennCare is unwinding. No one previously since the pandemic has started lost coverage unless they've moved out of state or things like that. So they're going to start unwinding. People are going to be losing coverage if they've lost eligibility, but also making sure that if they've moved or their information isn't up to date with TennCare, but they aren't eligible, that they're able to maintain that coverage and get in contact with TennCare to keep that critical coverage. Looking at mental health, what we see among our youth in some of the survey data is that Tennessee's youth have challenges with things like depression and anxiety at a very similar rate to those across the country. But where we struggle is getting the youth who are having those challenges access to services. And then that's reflected in some of the suicidal ideation and suicide rates that we see. So what we see is 71% of youth with major depressive episodes did not receive mental health services. That ranks us 47th in the nation. And then youth with severe major depressive episodes, only 14% were receiving consistent treatment. Anywhere else in the nation, it would be twice as likely to be receiving that treatment. And in the best performing state, it's about 4 times. So looking at getting them access to care, one of the challenges is workforce availability. In Tennessee, we have 1 mental health provider for every 590 people. That's not specific to these providers, that's to all providers. And then nationally, that all providers see 1 to 350. And in the best performing state, which I will say is very small, so they don't have a lot of population, it is 1 to every 100. So definitely disparate access there in terms of workforce availability. Next, we're looking at, this is national data, this is AIDS data, so reflective of during the pandemic and the last 2 years, or the year prior of the pandemic. What we saw was in the 12 months before the survey, 1 in 5 high schoolers seriously considered taking their own life. More than 1 in 7 made a plan of how they would end their life. And then 1 in 11 did an attempt to end their life in the last 12 months. Looking at COVID and the pandemic specific to adolescent and teen girls, a study found that the pandemic was particularly hard on teen girls, comparing emergency room visits from 2019 to 2020, 21, and 22. And so what they found was that in 2020, they saw an increase in incidences of ER visits for eating disorders and tic disorders. And 21 visits increased for depression, eating disorders, OCD, and tic disorders. And by 2022, visits had increased for anxiety, trauma, stress-related eating disorders, OCD, and tic disorders. In general, adolescent males had a decrease in the number of mental health visits during the same time frame. And the study found that the number of ED visits for eating disorders among adolescent girls doubled during the pandemic. At the same time, visits for tic disorders roughly tripled. When we look at maternal mortality, there's kind of 3 categories that we break it out into. There's pregnancy associated, which is any death that occurs between conception and 12 months for any reason. Pregnancy related related is a death that occurs in a time frame where the person would still be alive had they not been pregnant. The cause of death is directly attributed to being pregnant. Pregnancy associated not related is a death that occurs in that time frame but is not directly tied to being pregnant. You could see things like a car included in this. But what we found is that the number of deaths that occurred during this time frame increased from 63 in 2019 to 98 in 2020. And then additionally, we saw a large increase in the number of these deaths that were pregnancy related, so directly attributed to being pregnant, and that increased by 27%. Looking at how those relate to mental health, for pregnancy associated deaths, suicide was the leading cause, or was the cause of death in 18 or 6% of those pregnancy associated deaths. For pregnancy related, mental health contributed to 27 of all pregnancy related deaths. Substance use disorder was a contributing factor in 26% of pregnancy related deaths. And then of the 29 cases where substance use disorder contributed to the death, approximately 3 out of 4 of those pregnancy related deaths had a co-occurring mental health and substance use disorder. Among pregnancy associated, not related, mental health contributed to 23 of all pregnancy associated, not related deaths, and substance use disorder was a contributing factor in 40% or 46% of those deaths. Looking at infant health, what we see is that Tennessee's percent of babies who were never breastfed continues to increase while the national number continues to decrease. So the most recent numbers we're covering around 30% of our babies were never breastfed. National average is 18.4%. We run about a 1 in 7 of our Tennessee babies were born premature. National rate is about 1 in 9. Our infant death rate is 6.9 per 1,000 youth or per live births. National rate is about 5.6. And then our teen birth rate is at 23.3 per 1,000, while the national rate is about 15%. Both of those have been steadily declining over the last decade. This last year, the national rate continued to decline, where we saw in Tennessee. We declined by, but not by as much as the national or as much as we have historically. Looking at our child welfare system, 1 in 5 youth entering foster care were re-entering after a prior episode. 1 in 8 were re-entering care after less than 12 months. Tennessee has had the highest rate of foster care instability in the nation every year from 2016 to 2020. And in the most recent year, from the comptroller's audit, first year DCS case managers had a 97% turnover rate within their first year. We did receive information from DCS where Tennessee discovered a reporting error during 2020 review of some of that information I just gave you. Tennessee was over-reporting placement moves. Tennessee was capturing hospitalizations and exits to trial home visits as a placement move. These are not considered moves under our standards. So therefore, Tennessee's data on placement stability in 2020, 19, and 18 was over-reported. And then just looking at where our youth who have delinquent charges are being housed, what we've seen is a trend of moving away from community placements and into hardware secure or detained placements. So I think it cuts off the graph a little bit, but what we see is that in 2018, we had about 74% of our youth in community-based placements. In the most recent 2021 data, that had dropped to 38%. In 22, that dropped again to just 30% of our youth are in community-based placements. And then additionally, we know that when youth are in aftercare supervision or probation, getting them connected to their community is really critical for success and to prevent recidivism. And what we saw was in the most recent audit period, although it did have improvement from the previous audit, monthly contact is not made with the child's school in 55% of probation cases and 28% of aftercare or supervision cases. So looking at improving that to make sure kids are engaged in their school as they head back to their community or as they're on probation in their community. And that is everything. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Callie. We certainly recognize that there is plenty of work to be done in this area, that in all the areas that you talked about, and we will continue to support our state's youngest citizens. The TCCY is at the head of skewing the advocacy for the good of this work. The past 30 years have taken a tremendous toll on all of us, but we have profoundly impacted our children. We will now hear a presentation from the children's mental health in a post-pandemic on the children's mental health in a post-pandemic world. I'm struggling to read this morning, excuse me. We will hear this morning from Allison Peak. Allison Peak is a licensed clinical social worker and the executive director of the Allied Behavioral Health Solutions in Nashville, Tennessee. Allison has spent the majority of her career dedicated to two primary passions: integrated behavioral health services in primary care settings and infant and early childhood mental health. Allison is privileged to be a member of the 0 to 3 2020 through 2022 fellows and to work alongside state and national colleagues to further infant and early childhood services and workforce development. Clinically, Allison is passionate about working with children who have histories in early trauma and their caregivers, reflective supervision, and utilizing RSC to build leadership capacity in systems. Please join me in welcoming Allison as she comes to share her work in infant early childhood and from a policy perspective.
Y'all hear me? It's rare that I'm in a room where anybody has to ask me to speak louder than I already do. I'm one of those voices that carry, so we'll see if that happens. Oh, look. It's so lovely to be with you all. It is lovely to be the person to see your faces, to get to spend some time. I told Kylie when I got here this morning, I said, oh, I borrowed a lot of your data. What that means is that we get to take some time now and talk about what those numbers look like in bodies, what those numbers look like as lived experience, as people, as children who have faces, who walk our sidewalks, who sit in our classrooms, who are in our ERs, who are struggling. So some disclaimers, some things that you should know about me. I am a social worker by trade and a clinician by practice. I came to policy and systems work by need for advocacy and change, for real belief that we have the ability to make things different for a next generation, that we don't have to continue to do the things that we all tell about, like, I don't know about you guys, but you have those stories from high school that you laugh and you're like, I can't believe we did that outrageous thing. Yeah, some of us do. But people don't have to repeat that, and there doesn't have to be that continuation of story, and we show up, we're in a relationship, we're able to make dedicated change for the next generation. So my specialties do include clinical interventions for children in child welfare, domestic and international adoptions, young children with severe early trauma. I feel like I need to say that. I'll tell a lot of stories today. Some of them are pretty rough because that is the world that I live in, and these are the kids that I serve. Infant and early childhood mental health in primary care settings and integrated behavioral health. I was a family member of the Association of Infant Mental Health in Tennessee and also continue to serve as a regional lead for them. And it really is just lovely to be here. So, all that to say, you've now spent 45 seconds in a room with me, and I'm pretty sure everybody has been like, that is an accent, right? Yeah. So in that, it's also really important to begin to spend time together and build a relationship that I named, that I grew up deep in Central Appalachia and what's referred to as the coal fields. And so this accent is a birthright. Yeah, 20 years out of the mountains, it's not going anywhere. But it also really speaks to the fact that for me, culturally, I was raised in a place where stories have profound value, and that many of the ways that we talk and teach are deeply rooted in story. And so it's very important that I name that for you all, because I will talk a lot today in story. It's also important as we begin to consider the experience of the other that I named for you guys, that babies and young children essentially mean change. The process of welcoming new ones into our world is one of the single most evocative experiences that anyone ever encounters. Even the most wanted and hoped for and loved and expected baby means change, and change is hard. So With that, also, as we begin to take this deep dive, it's important that I name that childhood, in a way that nothing else can, has a universality. I could take time and stand up here and talk to you all about psychosis, about mental health hospitalizations, about substance use, and there would be people in this room for who that would echo, and there would be folks in this room who have never had an experience of that, right? And we have all been through. Everyone who sits in here today knows what it is to have a moment where you asked an adult for something and didn't get a need met. Or you attempted so hard to be understood and just couldn't get that through. Or felt like the big people in your world had your very best interest at heart. And so ultimately, when we are talking about infants and young children, we inadvertently become talking about ourselves because we were once young children, and we know that so much more intimately than we do any other facet of it. So, Callie talked about a lot of these, but I'm going to go over them again because it's really important that we hear that these are not just numbers, but these are people and these are lives and this is reality and this is the experience of those that we serve. So across the state, currently there are about 410,000 children under the age of 5. Okay? So nationally, about 17% of children in that age bracket will have about 2 ACEs. In Tennessee, it's about 21%, meaning we're running 5% higher than the national average. 5% of 410,000 is what? Another 20,000 children. That's 20,000 children that go into our system, into our behavioral health needs. We need increased support in our education system. 20,000 children is a lot of other children in order to support above and beyond what is already being required in the national. 1 in 8 of Tennessee's babies are part of a family in which one or more parents was not born in the United States. So we have a large percentage of our children who come in immigrant families, and 1 in 10 of Tennessee's babies speak a language other than English back home. Approximately 1 in 20 children live in a family below the federal poverty line. Now, I would say this is a significant decrease in the last 5 years to what Callie said, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. There's some things in the last few years that we have done that have had really positive impacts for children, and some of those things have an expiration date on them. And when things expire, I don't know if anybody's ever left milk in the fridge for too long, but you know what? It doesn't work out super well. So we've got to be anticipating what's going to happen when that expiration date comes, right? So 1 in 4 of Tennessee's children have been diagnosed with a mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral health disorder. Now, what I want to really specify is that that statistic looks at children birth through 18, and we know that that also mirrors the lifespan, okay? So if we are looking at adults as well, it's going to be about 25%. If we zoom in on that and look at about 1 to 5, it's also going to be about 25%, okay? That's kind of standard statistic across the We look specifically at our child welfare population, our kiddos who are most at risk, who have had the greatest adversity, who have lived through traumatic events that are big and often unspeakable. More than 33% of every child who is removed in the state of Tennessee is under the age of 5. The largest population of children in foster care currently are preterm. We so often think about foster care and child welfare as adolescents, as kids who have interfaced with juvenile justice, and those kids absolutely exist. And most of their kiddos in foster care are beings in little bodies with big feet. We also rank first in the nation in number of placements for children in their first 12 months in custody. The average on that is 3.25 placements in the first 12 months. I am 2. And in 24 months of life, I have lived in 4 different homes with 4 different smells and 4 different common menus and 4 different schedules and 4 different sets of rules. And people are really curious why I'm trying to get childcare. So I had a lot for a little while to make sense of. We also know that statistically placement equals a 6-month delay in development for change. So much so is that statistic accurate that the federal government requires that children in child welfare under 3 automatically have an early intervention assessment. We have no idea. We don't know what happened, but we know that if you enter the foster care system, You probably got a developmental places, right? Trauma freezes our brain and has such an impact on our ability to sit in place, to learn, to access higher levels of thinking, that we know that those developmental delays occur. So now, not only am I 24 months old, we've had 4 houses with 4 sets of food, but those 4 placements at 6 months delay each equal 24 months of development. And my 2-year-old body is essentially functioning as a newborn. And people are still really curious why I won't take a nap and why I'm cranky when they ask me to share. Right? Big things in their little body. So where do Tennessee's babies spend their days? The cost of center-based childcare in Tennessee is currently almost twice the average cost of housing for a family with an average single parent utilizing more than 40% of their income. That's 40% of incomes are going to childcare. Oh my goodness. And we have all been to the grocery store lately, every 10% more eggs, right? It is really places what that is costing families to just make sure that children are in places they can be well supervised and that somebody got a background check, right? Those are not terribly high standards, and that's a good cost. Children on average in Tennessee, or childcare on average in Tennessee, is more expensive than the cost of in-state tuition. How many folks in here still have student debt or debt they took on from their own children's child? Thank you all for being honest. Yes, we appreciate you. Right? And childcare is more expensive than that. We are asking families with parents who are younger, who are not established in their careers, who do not have the same fiscal stability as we do kind of expect for older parents, to be making a greater financial contribution. And while I think early childhood education works incredibly hard, and they do so much across the state through our licensing providers, our childcare resource and referral, I also haven't ever walked into a childcare center that looks like this building. Right? Yeah. And it's costing a lot more. And so that's something to be aware of. Difficulties in finding childcare on average each year cost the economy about $2 billion of days people have to call out of work that they can't go in and they've lost their childcare. This morning, I have a train later this afternoon, I had 2 people email me. They're like, okay, listen, so we have the stomach flu and the nanny has the stomach flu, but we're gonna try to run the training while also running to the bathroom, but we'll be there. I promise. Who's done that last year? Yep, thank you all. This is all of our problem. This is an issue for all of us that impacts not only our families, but our long-term ability as a state to function. And beyond all of that, many of you all tried to find childcare lately. I was in a meeting for a county out east this week, and they let me know there are currently 4 licensed childcare providers in the entirety of the county. It's a suburb of Knoxville. This is a county full of like 50,000 people. 4. That's it. And our options are so limited. In part because it is so difficult to do these things and people want to take care of children well. And show up and do a thing well to make a lot of us as humans. So, in summary, who are our babies? Tennessee's babies are living in a really families with complex needs. Our recent financial supports that resulted from the pandemic are lifting and inspiring. And so while right now, a lot of them brought our families and our children out of poverty, there's real question about how long is that going to sustain? Or are we quickly going to see families and children return to a pre-pandemic economic state? It's curious because I'll tell you, I prepped this PowerPoint like 4 weeks ago. Okay? And this week alone, I had 2 meetings with state-based programs in which what I heard was, you know, the number of families in the last 2 weeks that we've had that have been evicted and are now homeless has doubled. Oh, wait a minute, Allison, did you hear that 4 of our families in our program ran out of SNAP benefits 2 weeks before they should have because the cost of groceries is so high? Getting a lot of headlines. These are not new things for you all to hear anecdotally. We are already seeing the expiration date of some of these policies come due, right? So while some things have gotten better, the reality is that babies and caregivers They're struggling. Childcare is limited in its availability. There are considerable mental health concerns for parents and children. Inflation is hard. I already made one joke about eggs. I'm sure I've got a couple more in the background. And there are a lot of employment-related stressors. You know, one of the things that I think is reality that is that with the pandemic, to a large extent in American culture, we somehow switched gears rapidly and kept going. You know, I'm in the middle of a book right now. It's called See No Stranger, and it talks about this idea of collective grief, that we grieve in community, that we slow down. Yeah, I told you, I'm from the mountains. One thing we do in the mountains, weather is death. And so do that, like we grieve in large, public, shared processes. And with the pandemic, we didn't do that. We just all somehow figured out how to sign on to Zoom and pack 10 hours of meetings into 6 and keep going. So now we're all trying to figure out how to like be in Zoom meetings, but be in person and teleport ourselves into these places, right? Employment-related stressors really come down on our children. Our children feel and hear it. So, infant and early childhood mental health is the pathway through which systems care for babies, young children, and those who care for babies and young children. We define infant and early childhood mental health as the capacity to grow well and love well. And infant and early childhood mental health at its core is how we support babies and families to love well and grow well. So these are deeply rooted in attachment theory and the idea that at our core we are born for relationships, that we are interconnected deeply. One of my very favorite quotes from a sociologist named D.W. Winnicott, and he says, "There is no such thing as a baby. There is only the mother-infant pair." Now, a caveat there, this was like sociologists from like the early 1950s, so like let's cut me right for a hot minute. But the reality is that we are not relational people without the other. We're not moms and dads and aunts and uncles or cousins or brothers or sisters. Those are relational titles if there is not a mother. And the reality is also that there are literally not babies and there are not adults to take care of them. Maybe. Just like evolutionarily. If you think about like leaving a baby in the woods for 3 weeks, like it's not going to go. Right? So that attachment allows for us to provide regulation for affective arousal, to promote expression of feelings and communication in powerful ways. If we're really thinking about how adults tell children what is safe about the world and what is big and scary and how to interact with those things. We know that infant and early childhood mental health helps to both prevent and mitigate adverse childhood experiences, and that ultimately we are holding the relationship as the point of intervention. It's a place of being together that helps us all to grow well and love well. So, in infant and early childhood mental health, we also talk about the idea of ghosts in the nursery. And the story goes a little something like this. So, the originator of infant mental health was a lady, well, the theoretical originator of infant mental health. Infant mental health in the process of relationships goes back to like all the time, like queer relationships. But Selma Freiberg was a researcher at the University of Michigan who was working on a project with Jean Piaget on developmental milestones for children with vision impairments. And so some of her grad students were doing like a controlled trial observation. Okay? University of Michigan Hospital sends over a family, it's a mom and a baby, and mom's like 19. This is the early 70s. So mom's like young, but not like super young. So mom and this baby come for this observation, and they're like sitting in this like clinical room, two-way mirror. Selma Freiberg and all of her grad students are like watching all the things. And this baby starts to cry. And cries. And cries. And mom never moves. This goes on for 20 minutes. And this is the early 70s. There's no Candy Crush, there are no text messages, there's no 17 magazine, there are no distractions. This is just a mom and a screaming infant in a room together where no one breathes. And so curiously, Selma and the rest of the researchers take a step back and they ask themselves, what is it about this mom's experience that causes her to be unable to hear this baby's cry? And part of our thoughts, what I would encourage you today in a place of thinking about policy is what is it in our collective experiences in Tennessee that makes it difficult to hear our babies cry and to meet the needs they are asking us. So when we think about Tennessee's families, the ghosts that we see really are that we believe deeply in infant and early childhood mental health, that parents are the ultimate authority on their children. Nobody knows their baby better than that baby's. They know that baby. But we also know that parents as they were parented or in direct opposition of how they were parented. How many of you all have ever had a family that was like, my mom did this and I'm never doing that, right? Or we also hear, well, that was the way I was raised, it's good enough for me, right? Yep, there's that replication in the relationship where you're going to do what was done to us or do the exact opposite. Now, 30 seconds with my clinical hat, what I will tell you is the exact opposite of unhealthy is also unhealthy, right? Healthy finds itself in the middle of things. Unhealthy swings to the right. I will also say, as a diehard football fan, healthy plays between the 40s. Hail Marys are fun, but they're not a long-term strategy, right? It's not right here. So, for Tennessee's families, we know that high rates of substance abuse and mental health concerns create the ghosts for our families. Limited access to quality mental health and substance abuse treatment further the ghosts in those families and those homes. Social determinants of health are major contributing factors to the ghosts that plague the houses across the state. And we have distracted, exhausted caregivers. We know that intergenerational trauma and infant and early childhood mental health really are population-based health crises. PERSA out of the federal government recommends currently that there is one behavioral health provider for every 10 to 20,000 people in a community based on the level of need and certain other risk factors. Currently, in Tennessee, we have about 125 infant and early childhood mental health and behavioral health providers. Now, what I'll tell you is we spent the last 5 years absolutely pounding pavement to build 125 people in the workforce. It's been an incredible state interdisciplinary, interdepartmental effort that has had incredible success. And if I stood up here today and told you you had 125 mental health clinicians to deal with teen suicide, we would all be panicking, and we should. And we should also be panicking about the fact that we only have 125 behavioral health providers to the 410,000 children birth to 5 across the state. It's simply insufficient. So we know when we think about a population health metric that really we're looking at about 40% of the population are going to need some level of services for support. When we think about our prevention domain, we're thinking about infant and early childhood mental health consultation, thinking about our evidence-based home visiting workforce, thinking about those folks who are really going to go in and support a good number of families. It's kind of autocorrect, take a few shifts, and really long-term do well. But we also know that about 10% of that population are really going to be our kids who have numerous ACEs, our kids who are in child welfare, our kids with a number of traumatic events, who are going to need that intervention and treatment sector. And again, right now, we have 125 people. And that's the last time I counted. There were somebody moved to Florida again. We're just like, our infant and early childhood mental health continuum exists across the state. We have a number of programs in promotion, prevention, and intervention treatment. Our folks at CCR&R, Governor's Early Literacy Foundation, our mental health consultants for Head Start, Early Head Start, all very much deeply grounded efforts for infant and early childhood mental health promotion across the state. Our prevention folks, again, at evidence-based home visiting, our consultation sector, our regional intervention programs. And then we also have our treatment and intervention sector. Again, we have a very limited but strong and intensely committed clinical sector. Our early intervention folks, and our second. So, again, how does policy hear the cries of our babies? Regardless of our goals for our nation's future, the well-being of children and families is the pathway that moves us towards those goals. You know, I was thinking earlier, our neighbors and kind of got this position and what that means and what that day-to-day looks like. And the role of those elected officials, everybody's got different roles. Some people are deeply committed to infrastructure. Alex, that was. Like, something like, that might be their goal. Right? Our goal may be increased educational attainment so that we're moving Tennessee further in the nation, right? Awesome goal. The pathway for both of those is going to be through children and family. How we move forward our future and our goals comes through the well-being of children and families. And so I really warred all morning whether or not I was going to tell this story, but it feels really important in the place of a call to action, in place of ensuring that we are hearing our state's babies' cries. And so just want to give you a snapshot of the world of mental health currently in the state. So yesterday was an average Thursday. Okay? I do get the great privilege of wearing a number of hats, of being executive director at a community health agency. Really, I deeply believe that our organization does good work on behalf of children and families in all the places that we serve. But by 10:30, I was on the phone with the school system who notified me that they were in a hard lockdown in one of the buildings we serve because they had identified a student with a gun in the backpack. Turned out to be BB gun, thank God, in that moment. But I will tell you this, the fourth hard lockdown since January in that county. That was about 10:30. Right? So then we spent the rest of the day saying, how do we respond to the kids in this classroom who are now traumatized? The teacher who is now also unable to provide.
Black and beautiful, black legislation, black and big, black and so much more, black and nothing. Black and educated, black and really, black and strong, black and
More exposed to
black and
opioids.
strong, black
If you're
and
old enough to start asking some questions, you begin to pray.
black and love, black and black gays girls, black is tough, black is hard to do. Black
The other
is
kids in
black.
my class.
Black is not something we get to, but it's something we get to wear. It's something we get to wear, it's right.
Back then, I thought it's harder than actually. So here we sit in this.
Every voice is seen. Black is legendary, freedom ring every sound. Black is adjective.
I call it.
You're so blessed, you smile, the stars come out. So glad for your voice.
The policies that care for caregivers and the caregiver workforce support that well-being. Things like paid parental leave, addressing the cost of childcare to families. I think about things like promising futures that's currently in front of the legislature. The opportunity to really think about how we are supporting the cost of childcare to families. Increasing accessibility to quality childcare options. What's the opportunity for increasing the childcare that's available across the state? 4 to a county of 50,000 people is not going to be enough, right? We got to figure out what we're going to do to be able to make that something that people are interested in. How do we begin to create an interest in providing increased childcare and make that something that feels accessible? Policies that support increased wages for early childhood educators. Again, y'all, moment of transparency here. But if I've got the option to like wrangle a classroom of 18 3-year-olds for the same amount of money that I could like work at Starbucks and maybe get some free coffee, like that's a real question, right? In a child center in fourth grade, they're real great, and sometimes they're not. That's just reality. If we want early childhood education to be seen and respected as important as it is, we're going to pay people for it. Recognizing the experiences of babies and young children matter. That means increasing developmentally appropriate assessment and diagnosis. Increasing the workforce of clinical providers who see a young child who is hurting and can respond, rather than saying, I don't know, wait 6 months, bring them back when they're 6. I don't think the 2-year-old remembers being in the house in the middle of it burning down. They do, okay? Supporting our safe baby court teams as they establish and maintain across the state. We also want to know that infants and young children are served and supported in context of relationship, that we are looking at 2 generational policies that support that relationship. So things like putting these 2 gen grants and programs, evidence based on visiting insists that all 95 counties, we are the only state that makes that commitment to infants and young children. to ensure that evidence-based home visiting is available wherever you live. With a huge statement on behalf of what our state does for families, and the maintenance of that is essential for so many. Availability of high-quality dyadic infant early childhood mental health services. Again, 125 clinicians is great. We need about 2 to 3 times that. That's going to take workforce development. That's going to take commitment to training and continuation of those programs. Mindy will talk in a minute about Tennessee First Step Training Institute, but there are pathways to continue that. And then we're promoting economic security of our trainings. So in that, we're also caring for our workforce. It comes to the professionalization of saying, like, serving young children and families is a thing. You can't just walk in off the street and do this. Like, this takes specific knowledge and specific training and specific education. And that professionalization of the workforce is really important. Part of the way that we do that is through ANCON Tennessee's endorsement and the endorsement system. Through adequate reimbursement of billable services at rates that recognize infant and early childhood mental health as a specialty service. Y'all, it's a whole soapbox. I can spend the next 3 hours about it. But let me tell you that right now in the state of Tennessee, I get the same reimbursement as a clinical provider for sitting in a room with a 3-year-old, the foster parents, the bio parents, a DCS worker, and a pending court letter to be written, as I would get if I sat in a room with a 16-year-old who had a recent breakup. It's not the same work. Both incredible work, but not the same. So again, really thinking about training and technical assistance to our statewide workforce. Again, ANCON Tennessee is the hub for that training and technical assistance. Real strategic planning around workforce development support, maintenance and continuation of the Tennessee First Step Training Institute. So I thought one should have that. It's not really a newsflash to anybody. But if you got questions for ANCON Tennessee, you'll find the contact information there. My contact information is there if you got any questions. I'm going to look at Matt Marshall and see if we have any options for questions. Don't know. I may run up. He says I can take 1 or 2. So. Oh, wait, one back. Help me.
What they doing, but I think we're like, funding and other things, what they first do they should happen as far as making sure that we can keep that step. Because I also work on workforce where we build a string of staffing, funding, training, all those different things. A lot of people are overworking every time to there's a whole lot, and I feel like there's not really a lot of support from clinicians who want to serve. But then some of them still also live in conflict situations themselves.
So the question both for folks who are online and just in the room was what are options strategically to be able to support the workforce who's also feeling that place of inflation, their own poverty level living conditions, really in that space of how we're creating space to achieve new things when right now everybody feels so deeply in survival mode. Is that a fair term? Yeah. I think that's a really good question. It is also really a place that I would speak to. I was on a phone call this morning before I got here from North Carolina. It was on a phone call with Arizona on Wednesday. Both of those states. And so I think part of this is also a national issue that we are hearing repeatedly is this sense of, again, we went from what we all consider to be typical, then smashed 10 hours of meetings and 6 hours of Zoom. Somehow forgot we had to drive places and go to the bathroom, and continued on as though nothing had occurred. Right? And we are now feeling the brunt end of that. One of the things that I will say that Tennessee is having specific conversations around when it comes to clinicians and clinical providers is around recognition of some of those supports as potentially included in billable activities. Okay, so in the clinical world, one of the things that we know is a concept that we talk about is supervision. that there is a necessity for there to be time to sit and slow down, to think through the services being provided, to really give honor and space to the work that we do. I mean, currently, the agencies that provide that within the state do so as a commitment to their workforce with zero reimbursement around it. It's not a reimbursable activity. So inclusion of that within a reimbursement structure is definitely a conversation that's happening so that it is better able to be elevated and prioritized within the. We are also seeing, when I think about DHS's 2-gen programs, evidence-based home visiting, those kind of state-funded programs are including those activities as part of the expected outcomes in an effort to really highlight that the workforce needs those times to slow down, to reflect, to consider impact of things, and that it is becoming an expectation and not an occasional hope for option. So I think both of those are really substantial shifts. Okay. It was really lovely to be with you all this morning. So excited for the rest of our day.
Good morning. I'm Katie Spurlock. I'm Deputy Director at the Urban Child Institute in Memphis. And first of all, I just want to say how grateful I am for Allison and for this panel that I'm going to introduce. And you'll see that we heard from Kylie, we heard some data from Kylie, great data, very relevant to Allison's presentation. Going to be relevant to the comments that are going to be made by this panel. So this is really building on itself to go deeper and deeper into understanding child mental health and infant early childhood mental health in particular. But I want to tell a little quick story about Allison. She was initially going to be on this panel. We're going to have a 5-person panel, and then Matt Marshall and I are both on the board of the Association for Infant Mental Health in Tennessee. And at our last meeting, Allison presented at that meeting, and Matt said afterwards, she's going to be the speaker. So that's how we got Allison today. And I'm really grateful because Allison and these 4 women in front of you right now are really, really busy people. They serve clients, they're building systems, infant early childhood mental health and children birth through 8. So I'm really grateful that they're here. They've taken time to drive from here to be here today. So the way the panel is going to work is I'm going to introduce each of the panel. I'm just going to go through and introduce all 4 of them. And then in order, each one of them will take about 10 minutes or so to talk about themselves and their work that they're doing. Again, it will build on what Allison said. It will build on the data that Kylie gave us. And then we'll take some questions. I have some questions in case you all don't have any that will, again, take us even deeper into what they're going to talk about. So let me introduce them first. And I don't know if you all actually have all the bios. I'm going to read a little bit of the bios, but with the exception of Kim, I know each of these women quite well. And I can remember the first time that I met them and the impact that had. So I'm going to tell a little bit about that as a way of introduction, in addition to giving you a little bit of their credentials. And Kim, even though I don't know her, I was like, well, what am I going to say about Kim? I don't know. And then I didn't have to look far to find a place where she has shown her expertise to talk about how important that work is. So first, they're not actually sitting in order we're going to go. We're going to have Candace first, and then Mindy, and then Kim, and then Susan. So however, we move across the stage here. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of them before we get started. So Dr. Candace Thomas. So Candace is a PhD. She works to help individuals, programs, and systems of care experience transformation by learning, doing, and being. She is the executive director of First Aid in Memphis. So Candace moved to Memphis during the pandemic. She moved from Chicago via New York, where she was born and raised. She moved during one of the most difficult times in our history to a city she'd never been to take a brand new job that was created, and then national search was done and found Candace. And I happened to be one of the first people to meet her. She lived in my neighborhood. And her expertise that Candace brings to this work that she's going to talk about from the Irving Harris Foundation in Chicago. She's a national expert in infant and early childhood mental health. She has brought to Memphis some expertise and some experience that we are very fortunate to have. There is nobody that could have done the work that Candace is doing in building systems for children birth to date. So we will hear from her in a minute on her national experience and on the work that she's doing to build a system for early childhood care, health, and well-being in Memphis and Shelby County. Then we'll hear from Mindy Cronenberg. And Mindy is a clinician. I'm going to read a little bit. She's a PhD clinical psychologist who specializes in infant mental health and the assessment and treatment and trauma across the lifespan. She completed the Irving Harris, again, that's where Candace came from, Irving Harris Infant Mental Health Fellowship at LSU Health Sciences Center, where she served as an assistant professor. Now, my first experience with Mindy was, I don't know, I mean, it's been at least 10 years. At the Urban Child Institute, we were now located at Crosstown in Memphis. We used to be located at 600 Jefferson, and we had speakers come in monthly that talk about things related to infant or to early childhood. Mindy came in as an infant early childhood mental health specialist, and I was like, what is that? Why infant mental health? I was one of those that thought infant mental health babies on a couch when I first heard that term. But Mindy was the first speaker that we had that came to we call them the water cooler events, that talked about a topic that was brand new to everybody in that room that we're supposed to be focusing on early childhood. And since then, she has continued to educate the community and advocate for this very specialized area of early childhood. And then next, we'll have Kim Parker. We read a little bit about Kim. She's the one that I know the least. Just met Kim this morning. She is the Director of Crisis and Family Services at Pathways of West Tennessee Healthcare and has worked in the social service field for over 32 years. She's worked with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as children and families and individuals with both mental health and substance use diagnosis, and also has provided crisis response services in the community and healthcare settings. So what I learned about Kim, when I was thinking, what am I gonna, I don't know Kim, and I've heard people that were on the planning team for this speak for credentials. One of the, you all have a handout on your table that has some calls to action around child mental health. If you look at the 5th call to action on the back of that page, you will see that one of the recommendations is to put into effect all of the recommendations that were made by the Public Behavioral Health Workforce Work Group. Well, when I went to reread that document again for like the 3rd time to really fully understand all that it's about, and I looked, who is involved in this work? Kim Parker was one of the stakeholders that was involved in creating that document. So I encourage you to get to read it and to look at it. It is very well done. It is easy to understand, very lay friendly, and it calls for some of the recommendations that Alex alluded to: higher reimbursement rates, improving our workforce, incentives, and higher pay for people in our child mental health workforce. Because unless we're going to pay adequately people for the work that they do, they're not going to enter that workforce. Like Alex was saying, they're going to go to Starbucks, wherever else they can go to earn enough money to feed their families. Finally, we will wrap up with Susan Ellswick. Susan is an LCSW in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. She's a licensed school social worker in Tennessee. She is nationally certified in several different mental health CBT, TSCBT, autoplay, and EMDR. And I know those are a lot of acronyms, but I know what some of them are. But I will tell you that's a lot to be credentialed in terms of her ability to provide services to children and families. And here's my story about Susan. Susan is another one that I met for the first time at 600 Jefferson in Memphis. We at the Urban Child Institute had convened another meeting, and we had a national speaker. We had a woman from Florida. who came to Memphis, and this, we were talking about social determinants of health. She came to Memphis to talk to us about some heat mapping that they were doing in Florida to find out, where children and families were in, having the most trouble in different parts of Florida. And after that, as a result of that, we decided to pull together a team of people to talk about the social determinants of health and mental health. And Susan, if you all knew all that Susan does, I mean, I could stand here for 3 hours and listen, but Susan was the first person, it was the first time I'd seen her. She came up to me after that and she said, I want to be on that. I will talk co-chair and I'll be on that group. And she has since, and then, like that was the first time I met her, every meeting I went in after that, Susan else with this, and Susan else with that. I said, well, I just met her the other day because she is everywhere. She is, and she remained, I don't know how she continues to do it, all the work that she does. So again, I just want to say I'm really grateful for all 4 of these women and for Allison too, and Kylie as well, of course, for being here today to help you all understand better. I know many of you are in this field and know a lot already, but I think we're going to continue to give you more information that will be useful to policymakers and useful to people who make decisions about children and families in Tennessee. I really love the way Allison put this. What are our babies in Tennessee crying for? And I think we'll get to more of that now. So we're going to start with Candace, and then all 4 of them will go. Susan's actually got a presentation we're going to run, and then we'll take some questions. Why don't you come up here? Move around a little bit.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me, and Katie, thank you so much for the lovely invitation and the introduction. Sometimes I cannot believe that I moved during a pandemic and during a global crisis, and then starting a brand new organization at that time in a brand new community and a brand new system. So I will definitely say it has not been easy, but I'm grateful. This is my first time in Martin. So thank you for having me, and I'm really grateful for the work. I want you all to take a moment and to remember a time when you were a child, when you felt safe and loved. Just take a moment to think about that. Maybe when under the age of 6, if you can go that far. Now, think about a time as an adult now that you've provided that same sense of love and safety to someone else. I remember when I was really little, I was born premature, 2 months early, so 8 weeks early, which is really early for any of you who know about preemies and know about child development, which is probably one of the reasons why I had asthma, right? Because the lungs are last to develop. And I remember being held all the time because I was born 4 pounds, 6 ounces. And my mother used to say that I was so little that she never wanted to put me down because she was afraid that I would fall or break something. And so even though I can't remember it actively, I remember this feeling of always being held. And then yesterday I happened to have the wildest, most stressful day. And 2 people on this panel, Katie and Mindy, I talked to yesterday, and I felt loved and safe. So as Allison said, some of the feelings and the experiences that you've had as a young child translate into how you are as an adult and the relationships you have as an adult. And if I could sum up any other way to describe this very nuanced term of infant and early childhood mental health, and Allison said it best in terms of the capacity to grow well and to love well. And I would also say to know what it feels like to be safe and loved and to provide that to someone else, particularly the next generation. And so for the last 16 years, I have been working to build a system so that all of us who care for young children know how to help them feel safe and feel loved, help their parents feel safe and feel loved, or whoever their caregiver is, their grandparent, a foster or adoptive parent, their uncle, whomever, so that that caregiver can help that child feel safe and feel loved. So I'm not a clinician. The work that I do is systems level, and how we've thought about systems work in infant mental health is some of what Allison already described. But one, how do we build a workforce? How do we make sure that all of us who are working with or on behalf of young children understand child development, understand that babies do want to be held, and it doesn't mean we're spoiling them, knowing that when the baby cries, we gotta go and figure out what's wrong, right? So how do we, as those of us who are working directly, as clinicians, as teachers, as child welfare caseworkers, as lawyers who are working on behalf of young children, pediatricians, all of us, how do we know child development, and in particular, the important bond of the relationship between a parent and a child? So one, training and capacity building, that's a part of systems work. Another part of systems work is all of the administrative advocacy. Allison talked a lot about that already. So what do we do with our state systems, DCS, DHS, Department of Education, to make sure that we're providing the best and the highest level of services for kids? So doing advocacy and educating, and then also building capacity for all of us as a system as that approach to do this well. A part of our system work has also included research, right? As you may know, really infant mental health research didn't start until about 50 years ago? Until about 50 years ago. So we didn't know, I mean, our communities, families, parents have incredible wisdom. And sometimes researchers take a while to catch up. So we knew from many generations the importance of the relationship with young children. Research from a technical level took a while to catch up to hundreds of thousands of years of our development and many other mammals that care for their young. So the important relationship of the parent and the child. And so a part of our systems work has continued to be around how do we continue to develop the evidence, because we need to develop the evidence for government to fund these things, right? So even though we know it to be innate in us, we still have to prove it for our funders. And then also to just continue to think about what are innovative ways that we can provide services for families. What have we ignored over the years? So we have ignored social justice. We have ignored centering the lived experiences of children and families, in particular Black or African American, Native American or Indigenous, Latinx families, Asian American families, et cetera. So we've done work. I've done work with an incredible group of colleagues for the past 12 years in rooting a lens of centering the lived experiences of these families in infant mental health, and then just disseminating best practices. So Allison mentioned Safe Baby Court Teams. Have any of you heard of it? Okay, great. So for those of you who haven't, the easiest way I can describe it, and Allison, Katie, maybe anybody can describe it better than myself, is how do we make sure that our courts understand that incredible statistic that I've never heard until now. I need that citation, that every movement that we force onto a child, that decreases their development by 6 months. So courts don't know, I'm gonna put this child in care, oh, this is not working, we're gonna switch families. Oh, okay, now we're knowing that at 6 months, we switch this child in a family, they're 6 months behind in their development. So I have done all of this work from a systems perspective. I was grateful, as Katie said, and as you heard about Mindy, to work for the Irving Harris Foundation. Irving Harris was one of the very first benefactors to support brain science and brain development and infant mental health research. And the foundation has supported national efforts and international efforts in infant mental health, including all of these ways to build a system. And now I'm in Memphis, trying to build a system in Memphis and here in West Tennessee. We've done many, many things to, over the last few years, to build an early childhood system in Memphis. But one thing I'll tell you about is we are embarking on an infant mental health landscape assessment. So all of these amazing women have done incredible work across Tennessee to understand what's happening with our babies, what do our babies need, what do our professionals need, what do the professionals need who serve young children. We haven't done it specifically in Memphis. And in my opinion, when doing it from a justice perspective or from a perspective of the lived experience of families, it's not about us as professionals. It's about what do families say they need? What are families experiencing day to day, families with young children under the age of 6, under the age of 3? So Memphis is embarking on a landscape assessment to understand what's happening in our Memphis and Shelby County, what's happening in our community, what are the experiences of young children and their families in Memphis and Shelby County? Do families know anything about infant mental health? What kinds of services are they getting? How do they find out more? Are we providing high quality, culturally relevant infant mental health services to families? If we're not, why aren't we? What does the workforce look like? And what can we do better in the future? So we're just beginning to embark on this. We're in the midst of hiring a firm to do this for us. So please stay tuned. We really look forward to the assessment, and that'll hopefully lead us to an infant mental health strategic plan so that we can address all of these incredible, very disappointing statistics that Kylie and Allison showed us in our community. Thank you for having me.
Morning, everyone. Part of me wants to say what Allison and Candace said in Instagram. But I think I will continue. I was born in Memphis. Was also premature for some circumstances. Sometimes tell a story about my nurse who was born about the same prematurity, and her father was a pediatrician. She was born in the 40s. They cut a hole in the door so that they could make sure that she was given appropriate care, but kept clean and healthy and no germs. About 30 years later, I was born, and my dad's also a pediatrician. He was a resident, and I also had lung problems. So I was medically aware, and what they did was they put a screen around my foot because they didn't want to take me out of the incubator. And every time my lungs would stop, they'd shake the screen. While I'm still in therapy, I can talk about that. But anyway, Hudson, he was born in the 1990s, and she was also premature, about the same age. And by then, we knew a little bit more. And a little bit more like Candace and your mom, and maybe your mom didn't was, and my dad did. And he was a resident, pediatric resident. We held her. She had a monitor. Often we took off that monitor, and we held her and we walked her. And that is what we tell that story because we talked. That is what infant mental health tells us. Sometimes the harder we try, the more we get physical or mechanical interventions in. And the more we move away from the feeling and the emotion, the worse we do. And if anybody knows about trauma, so I'm also a clinician, I was lucky enough to know Candace before. So I was trained in Harris program. I got 7 hours of reflective consultation. 7 hours a week. I've talked to other Harris trained clinicians who got 6 to 8 hours of reflective consultation a week. What is reflective consultation? That's different from other supervision. We talk about our cases and our clients, and then we learn. We talk about making it tonight, doing paperwork on time, hopefully. We also talk about how we feel. How does it feel to work with babies who have been currently harmed? My mentor, Joy Osofsky, was one of the early developers of Safe Baby Court Team. And in infant mental health, one of her colleagues, Bob Indy, said infant mental health the History of Mental Health for the World Association Conference, is the recognition of the suffering of children. It's seeing the suffering of children. If I'm going to work with children who've been born explosive, who are in withdrawal, who have had broken bones, who have witnessed, I apologize for sharing these details. I also think it is important to share these details because this is what happens to the children that we're working with at least going forward. If they have seen their parents, if they have been in car accidents, if I'm going to work with them, I'm going to help do this. I'm going to be able to support. And then what about their parents? What happened in their parents' lives? And how do their parents with big feelings who may have had similar experiences early on, how are they able to help their children? So in infant mental health, like both Allison and Candace said, we're holding the caregiver to hold the child. So in our clinical work, we hold our clinicians. Something called the parallel process is the technical term, and it goes all the way up. How are our administrators doing? How are our insurance companies doing? How are our neighbors doing? Who is taking care of them, and how are we each being held so that we can then in turn hold the others? And we can see what is going on in some of these children's lives. It is natural. Trauma, we know trauma theory, it's natural to turn away. That is how we defend ourselves. We don't want to look. If we're going to look, we need to support each other. I see this on the news all the time. I'm wondering if you've noticed it. If you see a reporter go to either a war zone or an earthquake, almost every time, and I notice it because I want to yell at the TV, and these are reporters that I like. I watch them every morning. And they're like, these babies won't remember. And I feel enraged because I spend my life saying babies remember. How do they remember? Can they tell us? The way they remember is in their bodies. One of the things we do in therapy is with words. I do something called child parent psychotherapy, and we'll talk about TFX. Remind me if I did, I do. One of the things I do in therapy is give children words. You saw mama die. You saw mama hurt dad. You were there when the house was on fire. It was scary. There were loud noises. These are things that we don't want to say to babies. These are things that are not natural to say to babies. Sometimes your mom used drugs when she fell asleep and she couldn't take care of the baby. Does that feel natural or good to say? Would I have a niece, she's 3, I have a nephew who's 9 months. Would I ever say that to them? No, unless it happened to them. And then I would give them words for their experiences. So what we know is that young children are more likely to be harmed by maltreatment. We also know they're more likely to have morbidity and attack. But because of their nervous systems, because of their hormones, because of their bodies, they're more likely to be. Yet we can continue to say at least they won't remember. Again, if we don't give them words, they won't remember in words. But they remember through their bodies, and they remember through what we call an internal working mind. And that is what we learned from very early on by how we interpret. Am I worthy of love? Is the world a safe place? Are others trustworthy? This is not just within our families. Allison at DW Winnicott said there's no such thing as a baby. Building on Candace's work, University of Florida tenants, Alicia and Chandra say there's no such thing as a parent. Parents are cared for by their communities and their society. There's no such thing as a clinician. Clinicians are cared for and taken care of and impacted by the circumstances of their society. So my call to you is to be able to see the suffering, to many judges say they won't remember. Again, they may not remember if we don't give them words, but they will remember in their bodies. And at 5 years old, a 4-year-old will maybe be knocked over in the hall. And because their bodies are on high alert, that 4-year-old's going to assume it's on purpose because we're created for survival, right? And if we were born or in a circumstance where our bodies have to survive, that kid's gonna immediately turn around, hit the other kid. I'm gonna get a call and say, this kid needs to be kicked out of school, he's sitting on this for no reason. There's a reason we may not know. So, this is why we need to develop the workforce. I was lucky enough to be in the Harris program. This is where I'm getting to TFFTI. We do not have a Harris program in Tennessee. However, Allison, along with AMHI and others, have put together to be the first couple trainings. And that is to give clinicians both knowledge, skills, and ways of they're going to get trained on the diversity informed infant mental health tenets that Candace developed. They're going to get trained on DC-0, which is the diagnostic manual specifically for young children. These children show symptoms differently. Children have short emotional attention spans. I had a grandmother call me once, a home visitor for me because mom and dad had both died. And they were worried about the impact on the children. They were about hearing. And grandma said, you know, I don't know if they really, they still play. They still seem to have fun. And I asked a few more questions. And they did play, and they did have fun. And they also, had, when they were upset, had a very hard time coming. It was done backwards, but the parents died out. They were very easily stuck. They were having a hard time. So they were able to hold both, and that's one of the things about working with children. We do see that ongoing development. I will say one other thing, Allison, we're talking about the child that Southern Child Care Act being placed in 4 different homes. We see that so often. Children are having tantrums and adults need to shut it down because it's fun secret. I sometimes really wonder about that. I have, and most of y'all know this because I call you what 4 to 8 tantrums a day. These things we could tell you how they would wish they could, but children don't seem to put out. Little children who are just learning to manage their bodies, yeah, we want them to like experience. We want to be able to be with them in their feelings, and that's one of the things we do in therapy. So the opposite of the case that Allison talked about is sometimes I'll get a call from a child welfare worker, and they'll say, "You see this 7-year-old?" And they'll say, "I noticed that there's a 1-year-old, and how are they doing?" And they say, "Oh, they're fine." They've been in 4 months and they're fine. So I'm a psychologist. I'm trained to diagnose mental health problems. However, I also don't diagnose mental health problems that aren't there. And sometimes not reacting is a problem. If you are put in 4 different homes, and that is what you expect, and you just adapt, and you have learned not to cry. Because if I cry, nobody will see it. That is also a problem, and we need to help train clinicians and others to understand to refer the children that we, so that the clinicians in TFFTI who can support so many of these children. So going back to that, they get the diversity informed mental health tenets, DC-05, something called facilitating attuned interactions. They learn to work in child welfare. They get child parent psychotherapy training, which I'm lucky enough to be an emotional trainer to teach specifically on evidence-based practice of working with infants and young children and their caregivers. We will never put a baby alone in a room on a college. We also offer reflective supervision because clinicians cannot do it alone. None of us can do work alone, and that's why we're offering free. I want to end with a quote, so by Selma Fragler, and I've talked about some pretty often. One of the things that Selma Fragler said is that working with young children is a little bit like having a bath on yourself. And the research, she put that in the 70s or 80s, the research had shown brain science, so brains are growing so fast, and if you work with young children, they are more likely to be hurt. They are more likely to be impacted because of their developmental levels. At the same time, because of their range of specificity and developmental levels, they're more likely to benefit. So offering services to young children is a little bit like having
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. I appreciate the opportunity. One additional thing about me, I am a grandmother of 3 grandsons, Isaiah, Levi, and Oakland, which I definitely enjoy seeing them develop, and the love that I shared for them and other kids that I work with throughout my 32 years of experience working in this field. As I said, I have worked 32 years, and part of that has been working with Department of Children's Services for approximately 8 years, and now in community mental health for 23 years, and some other work before that with the IDP population. But what I have seen over the years is a multitude of complex trauma and complicated grief in the families that I have worked with. But I've also, as I've grown through this field and moved into leadership several years ago, I know for a fact that this field has a lot of compassionate people in our workforce. And what I see is, people can start out very compassionate. And what we have tried to do is try to prevent that burnout. And it's very difficult to do in this field when you don't have the opportunity to give those clinicians the time that they need to really be prepared to address those issues that they see come before them every day with that complicated grief and the complex trauma. That takes a toll on individuals who see that day after day after day. And in our world with the reimbursement rates in community mental health, is you got a clinician that goes through school, comes in and sits in the office, and in order to be productive, to bring down what revenue needs to be coming in, they're doing back to back to back individual and family sessions that are addressing that complicated grief, and no time to just kind of, take time for themselves, take time to consult with others, and be able to really see the need to get that additional training that they need. Yeah, do we have training in place? We have trainings. Yeah, you've got this online training that you can take, take this on your lunch break, do this, and those type of things. Is the world that we live in community mental health and social services. And so recently I've definitely seen a major change with that, which I hope really continues with being a part of that workforce development, being very close with Commissioner Marie Williams, the Department of Mental Health and Social Services, and her work that she's done since she's been in office, and realizing those things are out there, those barriers. And so one of the things that I want to talk about today is Governor Lee last spring provided additional funding that will be recurring dollars through the Department of Mental Health and Social Services to dedicate to serving children and families in Tennessee. And doing that in such a way that is flexible to meet the needs of those individuals in the different areas of the state of Tennessee. And so that East Tennessee and the Knoxville area is not the same as being over in Lee County, and just to do it. You got to think about what are the needs of those communities, and understanding from a mayor standpoint, I know what our needs are here because I've talked to the residents of here, and understand that rural is not the same thing as being able to serve someone in an urban area. The urban area has their own issues, and so that flexibility came out with that enhancement funding, and so those funds will continue to be available. And what we have learned, there are so many things. Just in the last, we started hiring a workforce for this, and we'll talk about the grant that we put in place. We started hiring the workforce last spring after we got this grant, and then started partnering. But one of the things that the goals of these grants, the goals of this grant funding was put out through the work together with Governor Lee and Commissioner Marie Williams and Matt Yancey, 3 goals. And that was to promote maternal, infant, and early childhood mental health. The second was increase access to school-based behavioral services. And then the third was to ensure your enhanced coordination of crisis care. What we see in community mental health are those individuals that have come to us once that crisis is already hit. They're not seeking services as they're leading up to that crisis. So we're seeing them in the emergency rooms. We're seeing them from, working with Department of Children's Services. We see them, when they show up or they call, like I said, they go through crisis, mobile crisis, or some other through law enforcement. School calls us, like I've heard multiple people talk about schools are calling and saying, I don't know what to do here. And so those are the times that we see these individuals. Our goal in looking at that is trying to get these individuals and families to seek services, but before it gets to that crisis point. And not only before that, but understanding that many times, individuals, like I said, when they do try to reach out, that workforce is not there. Because you got therapists, we've got one child psychiatrist and 3 other psychiatrists and nurse practitioners in our community mental health center that covers rural West Tennessee. And I can tell you, we have a child psychiatrist. She started back in August. By September, she was booked solid all the way to the end of, I think it was the very middle of October. In a matter of 30 days. She had 2 weeks of training and thrown in there. Here you go. She's completely full. And so in this area of Rural West Tennessee, that she's the only child psychiatrist, in this area, full time this year. And so that workforce, as we've seen, that is definitely a need. So not only, trying to find those individuals that need the service, but be able to have that access so they can get in and get in quickly. And so what we did with that, with the grant dollars, is the Tennessee Resiliency Project grant that Governor Lee initiated, and I'm very dedicated to continuing that service. And so what we did at Pathways Behavioral Health Services is we looked at focusing on 3 different areas, looking at education, your health, as well as justice. So what we've done is we've developed partnerships with Head Start programs. We've developed partnerships with our school systems across, and going to them and saying in our school systems, not let us come in and do this and this and this. You tell us what are your needs here, and let us create and do the things that you see that you need. And to be able to have the ability to do that, to cover that, is so different than what we've ever experienced before. And so the other things that we have developed relationships with is hospitals that have mother-baby units. As we've all heard today, we've got to start from the very beginning of life. And even prior to, with these individuals that are growing up with these adverse childhood experiences. And so we've made partnerships, developed partnerships with primary care clinics, as well as juvenile courts. We're actually getting ready to open, where we've started growing so quickly with this Tennessee Resiliency Project grant. We are opening an office in North Jackson, in the Thompson Farms location that is right next to or right embedded with a primary care clinic with West Tennessee Medical Group, working with the pediatricians. And so we've gotten a lot of referrals from the OB doctors, and throughout some of these primary care clinics that we've established relationships with, so that we can start really young, early with them. So a mother comes in that's pregnant, and that individual starts that, we've got where these OB doctors are starting to do the Edinburgh assessment immediately, where they're assessing the mom's, a level of depression, looking at their enjoyment, self-blaming, anxiety, worries, coping, and all of those things that they're looking at. So they're screening that. And then once they screen, if you score, it's a score that goes to 30 on that Edinburgh. If you score 10 or higher, then you're at significant risk of, major depression. And, you know, a mom is dealing with postpartum, having a baby and dealing with postpartum depression. How can that mom connect with that baby, which is so crucial at that time? And so starting earlier, prevention is definitely necessary, but we're talking about starting early with intervention, understanding that mom's dealing with that depression. And so we have been able to get those OB doctors to do these Edinburgh screenings and then notify us if it's 10 or higher so that we can get in there and get involved. And then we continue to do those Edinburghs, you know, on a regular basis to see what kind of outcomes are taking place. And so that's been one of the things that we've been able to do is those partnerships. A traditional therapist in the office does not have time to go out and build those relationships and work together. It takes all of us to be able to meet the needs of these individuals that have suffered from, and I say this over and over because I see so much of it, that have suffered from the complicated grief and the complex trauma. That's the only way that we're going to try to break this cycle, is to be able to get everybody involved in all these entities. It's a collaboration, not just between community mental health, it's not between all the different departments of the state. They've got to work together. There's Department of Education, working with Department of Mental Health, and, you know, looking at how they can merge together to meet these needs. And so some of the benefits and flexibilities that we have been able to offer through our Tennessee Resiliency Project grant that I mentioned is having the real, not the training that's needed for our staff. Our staff have been a part of Allison's, what she talked about with the TFFI, the Tennessee First Five Institute. And I can tell you, and I'll end when I finish, I'll end with a couple of stories of how our involvement with the TFFI has really helped our clinician to be able to make major improvements in the lives of these families. And so, but being able to have time to do that, be a part of that cohort group, and the training that come out of that, the 0 to 5, the behavior intervention, child parent psychotherapy. But years ago, that way back in the early 90s, when I worked with the Department of Children's Services, so many times, because I worked with the prevention program and family crisis and things like that, parents would show up in court and say, I don't care, Judge, just take them, send them wherever you need to, just get them fixed. Well, it's not about just sending them somewhere and getting them fixed. You got to do this as a family, you know, unit. And so what we've been able to do with being a part of that Tennessee First Five is learn how to do that together with these families. Help that mother at the same time to deal with her grief and her trauma that she's dealt with through child parent psychotherapy. And at the same time, we're working on that child's behavior issues that are showing up because of, you know, the emotional stress that that child is facing and the lack of connection that they've been able to do. And so, yes, it's been wonderful to be a part of that, because otherwise we would not be able to dedicate our staff time to be able to do those things. Yes, and this is a sustainable program because as they're getting this training and going out in the field, they're being able to do billable services, which is another thing as far as reimbursement. We want to, instead of being right there in the office is good. Many times we want to be where the parent wants us to be. If they want to come to the office, that's great. But if we need to go over to rural Lake County to take the time to drive, there is no reimbursement, you know, from any of the insurance companies to go to have that master local therapist that they're trained through the TFFI to drive all the way to Lake County, do this visit, this very important visit with the parent, doing that child parent psychotherapy, and then turn around and drive them back. There is nothing that covers that. And so this grant does allow that flexibility as well. It allows us the time to partner with the individuals that are identified, as I talked about, with the primary care clinics throughout West Tennessee, with the hospitals and with the Head Start observations that we do. And we're able to go back out. What we've been doing is going out to these Head Start observation locations We serve 69 classes in Head Start across rural West Tennessee. So we're going on site, and the parent has been meeting us on site. They allow us the space to do the child parent psychotherapy there in place. And so that's been very beneficial to have the ability to do that as well. What I want to end with is some of the outcomes that we have been able to see throughout being able to do this grant and have that flexibility with this particular grant. We have seen, since July of 2022, we have served 226 children in this particular grant. And with that grant, out of those 226 children, 127 of those kids have never, ever received any mental health services before. And all 127 of those, when we got them, they were already in crisis. And so we got to continue to go out and find them and not sit back and wait for them to call us and come in. And so the only way to do that is by continuing those collaborations with those different agencies that we talked about. 98% of those 226 children that we have served since July have been able to maintain in their homes. They have not gone into, gone through juvenile detention and be placed into a facility. They've not gone into DCS custody. They've not gone into hospitalization. So 98% of those have been able to maintain at home. And again, that goes back to our staff having the time to be, to get the training that Allison Peak has done with her TFFI and stuff like that, to know the ins and outs of what we need to do and have a consultation on those very hard, difficult cases. Some of the other things is our work in the school systems. 73% of all the students that we've served in the schools have shown overall improvement as reported by both the parents and the teachers there at the school. 71% of the families that we've served from juvenile court and from referrals that we receive from primary care clinics, 71% of those individuals have reported overall improvements with not only with their child, but with their family unit as a whole. And being able to address some of those things. We talked about the Edinburgh, where finding out the baseline, screening tool with that, with the OB doctor, the postpartum mom that we observed with the mom's baseline. We started out with the average baseline of these mothers that we've served of the 23 out of the 30. And as I said, 10 being significant depression. And so with that baseline, we've seen over 3 months of working with them, we've seen a decrease with that number of 10 going down to 10 levels within that score for that Edinburgh. And I want to end with 2 stories that are real stories with two of our patients that we've been able to have the time to coordinate and the training needed to be able to access, to do the things needed to show the improvements with these kids. We've got one child that is 3 years old in one of our Head Start programs in Rural West Tennessee. We started with that child. He was in that Head Start program, in that classroom, constantly fighting with the other kids, very destructive, would lay down on the floor, bang his head against the floor, bang his head against the wall, biting himself, pulling his hair, and just constantly doing very self-harming things. And we were able to bring in the grandmother and the mother that is dealing with an addiction, but we've been able to bring the mother as well on site at that Head Start program. And then we have a team approach as a case manager and the therapist that both have this training that's needed. And so we're constantly out there and providing the needed service. And just last week, the grandmother of that 3-year-old and the mother, they ran a meeting with the Head Start and our staff, and the grandmother came to tears of joy, where she said, I've never in this child's life in the 3 years, this child has cried from day one both that I've been caring for this child. I've never seen this family unit come together as it has. And in this child to show the improvement that this child has been able to learn things now in a school setting and not disrupt the classroom and not do anything to harm himself. And then the mother is now seeing those changes and the mom is now on treatment for, her substance use addiction. And so now, we'll continue to work with the mom and with the whole family to make that transition, because it's not going to be easy transition when the mom completes her treatment for the addiction. And, it's going to be difficult. It's going to need that support. And so with the training that we've had, we'll be able to make that, stay with the family and continue to make that transition smoother for that family. The last one I have is we had at the end of the month of January, we received a kid that is 9 years old that was in the emergency room and they were trying to find placement. He came in before Christ because he tried to poison his brother. He said that he was hearing the voices to tell him that he needed to poison his brother. And so that's what he did. And this kid is a Hispanic kid and his parents were there. His parents are non-English speaking. And so, a lot of the resources that go into trying to make sure that they get everything they need is, interpreter services, again, something that's reimbursable. To be able to have, it is reimbursable by a very small amount, but not the coverage of the time needed to do that. So we took our team and we met at the emergency room. The kid had to stay there for, I think it was about 4 days in the emergency setting, with emergency room setting, because they couldn't find placement. And so we were able to get our team in. We got our child psychiatrist in there. We got interpreter services and our therapists in there. We're able, having the time that needed to really address some of those things. The child psychiatrist was able to get the child started on medications, was able to develop a plan. We got him back at home with some intensive services in the home, as well as got him enrolled in our intensive outpatient program and got him on the medication and case management and ongoing individual therapy as well. In a matter of 3 weeks, this child has shown a remarkable improvement, and the family is very satisfied and very willing to continue to work. And in the IOP, the kids develop friends, doing much better in the school. And so these things work. We just have to think about how are things reimbursed, because you've got to be able to collaborate. You've got to be able to go out and do those things. And these people that are getting out of school and going right into work, we got to think about there's still more training to come. They've had great training in their education institutions, but there's still that, work and yet additional training that needs to be there. And we got to be able to have reimbursable rates to cover that. Thank you.
I'm thinking out of way. Thank you. So I'm here today representing 2 parts. So I am a private practitioner. I do work in the community, providing direct services, but I'm also a professor at a university, the University of Memphis. I'm in the School of Social Work. And so I am working to try to prepare students to be ready for this call of action. But what we do know is that higher education, I gave them a wonderful graduate school here in Tennessee. But I was trained in infant and early childhood mental health. That was not curriculum that was embedded into the So I come out of higher ed, ready to work the very first place that I had was in a preschool setting. So I was in a very rural area. I was the only school social worker for 13 schools. And my primary goal was to focus on early and emergency services and programming. But I had no training in that. I wasn't prepared for that. I'm a product of TPFT. Thank you very much. So we're going to notice again on that. I would be standing here today endorsing infant health in the state of Tennessee if it wasn't for Athens' program. I did not have that content knowledge. I did not have that information in my curriculum. And so DC 0 to 5 was one of the best trainings I've ever been to in my life. The fan was wonderful. Diversity attendance was great. Thank you, because I had the experience that was you. Mindy is my student trainer. So even though I knew these individuals, you know, outside of going through that program, I never had the experience in higher education to get that development level, being prepared for the workforce after graduation. And so we understand that our educational programs are realizing there is not enough curriculum infusion, there's not enough information being embedded into these master's level programs, not just social work, but counseling, clinical mental health, and psychology, that are preparing our workforce for working in the communities with these little babies. So we have seen some wonderful things happen. So I am part of AIMPI Tennessee, and AIMPI actually, when we started endorsement, we were working towards endorsement, we started to realize very quickly a lot of individuals were coming in who were seeking endorsement but didn't have all of the skill sets necessary for it. So AIMPI had a call of action to higher education institutions and said, we've got to figure something out. So they started a higher ed workforce, a task force, to start looking at our curriculum and content. Since that time, I will say I'm really lucky to have Mindy in Memphis region. We actually started an infant and early childhood mental health course at the University of Memphis, and Mindy is the one that teaches that course. So we're very thankful, but from the information we gathered from the state and from AIMPI, we realized we had to change our curriculum. We had to start embedding this information into our content. We also have colleagues at ETSU, MTSU, and even UTK that are doing excellent work to make sure that this content and information is getting embedded into those courses. We also have been discussing the opportunity for a collaboration on a graduate certificate for infant and early childhood mental health. Because we understand that many people like me graduated from a master's program but didn't have this content. How can we reach those individuals after they've already graduated? AIMPI is also working on that. They work with community partners. Allison is an example of that. There's community partners and clinicians all over the state that they work with to say, hey, we need more content and training in this area, in this region of the state. So they realize that there are some deficit areas in the educational content and training materials, and we're really working on ensuring that those things are being brought to your communities and to your practitioners. Also, I'm a registered play therapist. One of the things that we realized in West Tennessee, in order to work with little bitties, you have to have the skill sets of knowing how to work with bitties, right? CBT, not the thing, right? Children communicate through play, but we only have 15 registered play therapists in all of West Tennessee. So we realized we also do not have enough clinicians that are trained and ready to work with littles the way that they communicate. So the University of Memphis is launching a graduate play therapy certificate. Again, because I didn't have that opportunity when I was in graduate school to take a course like that. So we are offering that support both for students that are currently in our program, but also for practitioners who are already working in the community and really would like to move towards being a registered play therapist. They can come back and gather that information in a post-grad opportunity. Also, we need to really be thankful for our state level support organizations. I've mentioned AIMPI, but things like the Tennessee Department of Education, they have created a mental health collaborative that at the state level, many of the mental health practitioners across the state that work in schools, so school psychologists, school social workers, school counselors, school nurses get together to kind of talk about what's going on in education, what is needed and necessary, where are the gaps in service delivery, and where can we start providing some additional supports. So I've been part of that mental health collaborative for a number of years, and it's really been great to hear, you know, what are the needs, and a lot of times it look very similar in really urban areas and really rural areas. What we do know is that in rural areas, and we'll talk about that in a minute, there are not enough school-based mental health practitioners to provide the services in this. So NASW Tennessee, this social work organization in the state of Tennessee, as well as the TASSW, which is our state level Association for School Social Workers, realized, okay, for me, being one school social worker in a school district with 13 schools, how effective was that as a practitioner? Not very effective. I know that. All I was able to do was crisis management. A kid is dysregulated. I need you to come in and assist. The child is regulated. I moved on to the next. So having one school social worker for 13 schools is not effective. But what we did find is that in a study that we did in 2018 with NASW Tennessee and TASSW, this was the precursor to the data that Kylie actually presented for 21 and 22. We only had 42.8% of schools that had no social worker or mental health practitioner. So all the things that are highlighted in red, those were school districts across the state that had no school-based mental health practitioner to provide services. So they were focusing on community mental health agencies to come in and provide those services to assist them with those supports and those needs. So we realized that there was a great need for school-based service delivery, but we also understand that we don't have enough psychologists either. And in order for children to get identified for service delivery in public education, you have to have a school psychologist conduct those assessments. So TASC is an organization in the state that has done really great work over a number of years to try to grow the number of school psychologists in our state through stipend work, through relocation fees, and through training and consultation. And then our school counseling organizations have a similar problem. We don't have enough school counselors either. And so we're seeing all of these needs in the schools. And we do know if you can carry the service delivery to children in the school, you're breaking down all kinds of barriers to service delivery. I don't have to worry about referring the kid out if the caregiver can get there. What about transportation? What about financial constraints? The parent can't afford to go. What about the stigma of going to see a mental health practitioner, because we're still working on that. There's a large stigma, especially in some rural counties, that can be even more intense. So providing the services in the school takes away all of those barriers to service. And so, just like Kim was saying, we can't sit in our offices and hope that the kids get to us. They get to us. They get to us in a crisis state. We need to be providing prevention and those interventions directly where the children are and hopes to prevent those crises. And also, the Tennessee Association for Play Therapy has been integral in trying to grow play therapy populations in Tennessee. They do have some opportunities for grant funding for students who are trying to go back to school to complete that specific requirement, and they also offer a ton of professional development across the state. So for those of you that were like me and you graduated and you didn't actually take a play therapy course, they actually offer play therapy continuing education units that can earn you that registered play therapy certification. And of course, I talked about Mankind and how important that organization is to infant and early childhood mental health and programming in the state, and also identifying the needs and the clinicians that we have to build. We have to build that workforce so that we can meet the needs of children. We also in higher education are very passionate about training centers. Having hands-on experience about what I learned in the classroom is going to truly prepare me for practice. And so at the University of Memphis, we are definitely about engaged scholarship. We are definitely about curriculum infusion. One of the reasons I have a problem with certifications. I really do. But let me tell you why. I love to get certified in things. But the reason I do it, I have been very blessed in my life that I have not had to pay for many of my certifications as wonderful organizations like TTFTI, the Golden Center at UT in the Memphis region. I've been able to be trained in a number of evidence-based interventions with very little to no cost to me. Many of the students that I serve do not have that ability. They are not given that grace. So I try diligently to be trained in as many interventions as I possibly can so that I can infuse that content into my curriculum, and certain topics, the students can actually graduate certified in certain things, like cognitive behavior interventions for trauma in schools. I can literally train that in one of my clinical classes. By the time they graduate, they're certified. So they can leave the university ready to provide that service. So we have to kind of really think about how are we training our students? What opportunities are we giving them to have one of those hands-on experiences in getting these certifications? So these are just a couple of examples of the training centers that exist at U of M. Of course, UT, MTSU, ETSU, all of these universities have training centers. I highly encourage you to look at those training centers as opportunities for connection and collaboration within your organizations. Many of these training centers will come to your organization and train your staff in certain topics and content. So I do encourage you to kind of reach out. And when we think about workforce development and really ensuring that we are preparing that next level of clinician, we do know, we've heard today, we live in healthcare shortage. There are not enough mental health practitioners to serve the needs of the children and families in our community. Now, with that being said, we're still trying to figure out how intense is the need and what is going on with the services that are being offered and where are the gaps. So there is a landscape study that's being conducted at University of Tennessee Knoxville is the lead on that landscape study. And it's actually through the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, as well as the Tennessee Department of Education is to fund this landscape study. As a statewide analysis to kind of look at that comprehensive picture of what do K-12 services look like for children. They already know that there were 42.8% of districts in the state of Tennessee that had no mental health practitioner. Now we're trying to drill down even farther and see what else is happening in these districts. Are there any services that maybe it's not a direct person on staff? Where are they getting those supports from? So they're still working on that study. It was a post-COVID study also to see kind of how COVID impacted children, but also the needs in the school district. We are trying to use this information to identify mental health resources for these K-12 individuals, knowing that schools cannot do it by themselves. Even if every school had one school social worker and one school psychologist and one school counselor, that is still not enough. So we're going to have to use community-based resources, combine efforts in order to serve children. We're also going to be looking at data gaps and trends in K-12, really looking at districts, core regions, and statewide. So for more information about the landscape study, Gina Surgener, she is with UTK. She has been working on this project with the cohort. It is not an easy project. It's a lot about collection. So if you have information that you would like to share with them about your local school district or your mental health program or the services that you offer, anything that would be valuable to this landscape study, I really encourage you to reach out. Also, because there's such a deficit of school-based practitioners, April Ebinger at TDOE actually was successful in securing a grant that is going to address this. One of the things we know about school social work practitioners, psychologists, and counselors, they actually have to do their experience, their educational field experience in a school setting in order to be licensed through the Tennessee Department of Education as a school social worker, school psychologist, or school counselor. Now, I just told you that there were 42.8% of school districts that had no mental health practitioner. Where are those students going to get their experience? They have nobody to oversee their work. They can't go into those programs and get their field experiences done. So even in the Memphis region, and we have a lot of schools there, we struggle with finding enough placements for our students so we can get students to licensure. So that's exactly what this project RAISE is going to try to attempt to alleviate, are some of the barriers to getting mental health practitioners in schools and getting them licensed. So these funds will take 20 school psychologists, 20 school social workers, and 20 school counselors a year from graduate level programs that are moving towards licensure within those fields. And they're going to assist them through a stipend program. So they're going to provide them a stipend to go into a school district to provide the service delivery. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, any of other school social workers or social workers in general, that you get paid for your internships. No. So that is a huge win for social workers. School counselors typically don't get paid for their internships. So this is going to pay for their hours in their internship while also providing them oversight and supervision. They're going to push into these schools that have no school social workers so that we can build that capacity. Now, students that actually accept the stipend will have a 2-year requirement or commitment to the state. They will stay in that school that they're assigned for the first year after graduation. They're guaranteed employment after they complete their internship. So they stay in that school district for 1 year post-grad, and then they have to complete their second year somewhere in the state of Tennessee. And that's to keep clinicians in the state working in schools where they're being trained. And that's a list of the schools at the very bottom that we're targeting with this specific grant. For example, in West Tennessee, Fayette County, Tipton County, those schools are very under-resourced. So in the Shelby County, Memphis region, that's actually that West Tennessee region, those would be the schools that we would ask students to go participate in this program and do their internships in so that they could receive the stipend, but the school is also receiving support services. So in addition to the students getting the students getting stipends, they're also providing stipends through this grant for the supervisors. I myself at the University of Memphis, as I mentioned, we don't have enough supervisors in schools. We have a lot of students that want to be placed in schools to become licensed. I supervise quite a few students in districts I don't even work in So we can get them through to licensure, so they can get that actual license and get into the schools. They're gonna start offering stipends for supervisors. So if you are a school psychologist, a school social worker, a school counselor, and you happen to serve or in one of these districts where you take on interns, or maybe you never have, and maybe you will now, the stipend's pretty nice. You get paid to offer supervision to these students. They also offer relocation assistance, because I grew up in a rural area. And then I moved into the big city, so I've experienced both. I will tell you that it's much easier for me to move from rural to urban than it is for you to go from urban to rural. It's a culture shock, it's a change. So the other thing is, we have high enough rates of salary, they're gonna bring clinicians to those rural communities, and also relocation. Do they want to live in those communities? And if not, how can we make that something they want to do? And so relocation fees, also supporting them in getting acclimated into that rural area, those are also parts. These are some statistics that many of these we've already heard today. But when we think about the outcomes that we want for this specific grant, over the 5-year grant, it's a 5-year grant that we're going to be providing these services. We want to ensure that we're recruiting and retaining 300 mental health providers across 4 rural Tennessee school districts in the state of Tennessee. That's huge. But we have a lot of work to do in order to get them there. These are the universities that are currently partnering with us on this project: NTSU, the University of Memphis, UT Chat, and UT Knoxville. They all have programs that are licensure programs for each of those specific disciplines. This is a little more information about that project. If you would like more information or you're interested, or maybe you have an intern you think could benefit from this, projectgrades@utk.edu is the actual email address. You can send information there, and it will help you to link that student for the internship. Also, UT is working with a project where we're trying to increase public behavioral health workforce. I am lucky enough to also be part of this project, so I love my UT and TSU. Y'all are a great family to me. We definitely understand at the university level that one university alone cannot do this work, and we have to work together. So we're collaborating on a lot of these workforce development projects in order to better support the community. This will actually focus on supporting the development of workforce in high schools. So instead of waiting until somebody joins as a freshman at the university and trying to help them identify what they like as a career path, we're actually drilling down into high schools, and we're actually showing students what is it like to be a schooler? What is it like to be a psychologist? What does it look like to be a counselor? How about an educator? What about a nurse? We're actually going into these high schools and we're providing a campaign to build the workforce from the high school level. So by the time they get to college, they already have a pretty clear understanding of what profession they're interested in, and they can move towards those goals pretty quickly. So again, we're in phase 2 of that. We're going to be expanding what UT was doing already in the Knoxville region into Shelby County and West Tennessee regions. So that's an interesting project for really focusing on that early development of careers. Also, University of Memphis has a number of workforce development grants, specifically working with individuals who have substance use disorders. We have a number of HRSA grants that focus on the development of clinicians in integrated behavioral health programming, and infant mental health programming. We also have the peer recovery program where we're trying to grow the number of certified recovery specialists in the state to ensure that we have enough colleagues to be able to provide those. So the needs that we still have, I'm almost kind of on a soapbox with everybody else. We've got to look at supporting clinicians through licensure from the beginning to end. What we find is a lot of students graduate from the university, but never complete licensure, and there are barriers to that. The exam is one of those licensure barriers that we're actually investigating right now, because there's a lot of disproportionate data on who's passing that exam and what is that making our workforce actually look like. We also understand that it's very costly for clinicians to pay for supervision to get to the licensure level. And so even thinking about some of those pieces. We also need to support clinicians with higher rates of reimbursement. We've heard that over and over again. Many clinicians are leaving the state of Tennessee for other states where the reimbursement rates are much higher. We almost can't keep students after they graduate because they leave to go to other states where there are higher wages. So we train them up, They get all this great content and information and they leave us because we're not actually putting forth the effort to keep them in the state. We also need many more bilingual therapists. We do not have enough. We also need more minority therapists. When we think about cultural competence and providing supportive services to families, we need to make sure that our workforce reflects the families that we're serving. And then also we do need to have more male clinicians. We don't have enough male clinicians in the West Tennessee region. I have one colleague, Dr. Gregory Washington, bless his heart. Hey, I'm just like my go-to. I'm like, I got another friend that needs to do. Do you have any openings? Because there is a need for male therapists, bilingual therapists for minorities. So we think about just like what's happening in like the Memphis region, we've got kind of a local level. Shelby County government has been very supportive and provide a youth mental health committee there as well. I've been part of that for a number of years. That includes community partners, community voice, in addition to the Shelby County government identifying what are the youth mental health needs that we have. They actually ask youth, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? And these students were like, we're okay, we're done with the stigma thing around mental health. Now we just need mental health access. We would love to have it at schools. We would love for schools to understand that mental health doesn't mean suspension, that we have reset rooms and calm down rooms and opportunities to regulate instead of being sent home. So they took that youth voice and then they created opportunities where they're providing supportive services in really innovative ways. Some of our school districts don't have clinicians either, even in a very urban area. So we try to think about how do we take services where there are no services currently. Well, through telebehavioral health may be an option. So we're actually setting up telesuites across the city to try to identify some of those gaps in service delivery so that all families have access to services. Also, we look at our Memphis Shelby County schools. They just were a recipient of the Project Aware grant, where it's focusing 100% on mental and behavioral health services to children. They are networking with community partners in the region, not just trying to provide those services in-house, but how can we partner with our community organizations in order to serve the needs of children. And then Memphis City also is trying to identify how do we take the services into the community? Maybe we can use public libraries. Maybe we can use community shared resources to provide these services. So families can't get all the way across town to come see a professional, or maybe that clinician can meet them there. And so there are these shared resources and spaces for those services to be provided. One of the things I was thinking about, why school-based mental health, why providing services where children are. I was working in an elementary school, they still are a phenomenal school to work with. We got a first grader in who had transitioned since kindergarten to 6 different schools. So when you talk about transition in housing, transition in schooling also creates developmental lags and needs for children. This parent was very honest. She was like, I'm coming to a charter school because I keep getting kicked out of everywhere else. I can't keep a job. We're practically homeless because I don't have employment. Will you please take this kid? And of course, the school's like, we're going to do whatever we can. Now, this child was very dysregulated. He did property destruction. He was extremely aggressive. And I kept saying to the school, please just hold tight with me. Like, we're going to get there. Now, this kid had a lot of service delivery that we were providing. And it took a long time to build a relationship and a rapport with this kiddo. But I remember finally we started seeing some success and progress. The school was feeling really good. The kid was feeling really good. I come in one day just to kind of visit the school and he's crying. And I'm like, what's happened? And they were like, just go over and kind of check in with him. And I was like, well, what's happening? And he just like stopped. Y'all are going to miss me so much. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, my mom was coming to get me. I have a dentist appointment today. But y'all are going to miss me so much that I can't leave. So the relationship what we started was so ruptured. This kid didn't want to even be in the school. Now he's crying because he's going to miss school for 30 minutes to go get his teeth cleaned. Like relationships are power. But we have to have a workforce that's prepared to have those relationships with really challenging situations. And so I really encourage you to kind of look into some of the workforce development opportunities that are happening. We heard a lot about TTFTI. We've also talked about reflective supervision and consultation. That's really also something to think about for your organizations, because when we talk about workforce development, we're also talking about secondary traumatic stress recovery. How do we keep our workforce well
so they can continue doing the hard work that they're doing. And so there's a lot of research and a lot of support that are happening at universities across the state on secondary traumatic stress in education, secondary traumatic stress in mental health providers. And there are a lot of resources available, but we need to tap into those resources so that we can support each other. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'm just gonna wrap this up. I know we're going into a break. Yes, and you can ask, unless we have any burning questions, I was gonna maybe wait because I think we're over to the break, and you can ask one of these women questions then. But I just want to wrap this up really quickly with a couple of comments that I hope will tie everything together. What you've heard about children in Tennessee across the spectrum from birth to 18 is our children are in need for mental health services, promotion of mental wellness, prevention of mental illness, and treatment of mental illness across the spectrum. There are specialty trainings for all those children. We now are very fortunate in the era that we live that we have trainings. DC 0 to 5, Tennessee First Five Training Institute, PTFTI, training providers. We have all the trainings that Allison talked about for older children to help providers understand how to meet the needs of children in our state. But we have to pay them. We have to train them. We have to pay them while they're getting trained. And then when they're providing services to children and families, we have to pay them to do that. We pay them by reimbursement rates. 51% of the children in our state are on TennCare. TennCare is the one that's paying rates that are not really high enough right now to support the workforce that we have. So we have got to change that because the needs of our children are not going away across the age spectrum. So we need to, we've got some good things going in terms of workforce development that people have talked about, but we have to continue that. We can't do it all on grants. We have some great grants. We have to institutionalize that work and continue to build our workforce so that they can provide the services that our children need. So we'll wrap up here. Thank you all. And I think we're going into a break, and please ask questions of these women as you have them.
We are going to go into it, right? First, I just want to acknowledge Mindy and Candace for acknowledging me and hearing, and that do need to be held on a pretty regular basis. So we are going to take a short break, a much shorter break, 5 minutes. So be back here at 10 after. We're also going to switch up the schedule a little bit. Representative Darby is going to be up next. I've never seen Representative Darby talk for 20 minutes, and so I'll be surprised if he does this time. And so he may help us get back on schedule, but 5 minutes, we'll be back at 10 after.
Breakfast. Still breakfast.
Got one more PowerPoint to give you. I'm sorry. I normally try to make this super easy. Okay. All right. Come on. Do it. All right.
Okay, fun's over. Not responsible for not really. Yes, but I'm a rule follower, so. All right, next up, as I mentioned, we are making a small adjustment to the schedule. If, and apparently I took Dr. Reed's bio and put it somewhere else. Luckily for me, I know Tandy Darby. Representative Darby is a member of the legislature. He is also a dear friend of mine and a citizen of Whately County, a graduate of UT Martin. There we go. It's always nice to have an assistant. Tandy Darby is state representative for the 76th district. He's a lifelong resident of Greenville, and he's been employed with A&M Reporter for over 25 years. Tandy returned to his roots and is still working on the family farm. Tandy is most proud to be the husband of wife Casey, a financial advisor and father to his 3 daughters, Tess, Edie, and Sloan. The Darbys attend Bethel Baptist Church in Greenville. He received his Bachelor of Science in Business, in Ag Business, right here at UT Martin. He currently serves as Vice Chairman of the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee, member of the Calendar and Rules Committee, Education, Instruction, Physical Review, Transportation Committee, Select Committees on Rules, Agriculture and Natural Resources Subcommittee, and the Transportation Subcommittee. Are there any that you're top? Oh, my goodness. So please welcome with me this morning, Representative Tandy Darby.
Mayor, well. Apologize, it is break ready. I think all about 12:30 last night. I think we had worked and those guys are really showing me about and be all right ahead. And so I feel like I need to return the favor. Appreciate y'all working with me. And it's an honor to be here. Supposed to speak. And I know that everybody here's got adjectives in front of their name, when we look around, oh, I'm not sure. It's fair, but it's an honor to be here. And I'll fix to give you just some bullet points. I know I'm gonna try to, no doubt I will get y'all back on track. But when I'm talking about this, there is no us in Nashville doing anything for y'all. Y'all are the one that's wearing the boots. We hear from y'all. Y'all are what makes the state fun. And kids, that's a week. So what y'all do. So with that said, I'm gonna tell you what we're doing, and the two committees that I'm not on this year, I haven't been on bed. I'm on a small board of education this year. Last year I was on higher ed, and really, if the students with that, and we want to be on that one in my life. I learned so much. And the health issues, I'm not on any health. So I'm going to give you some bullet points that me and my staff have put together, and I'll take questions. But these are not my committees. There's lots of bills that I have tried to get heard of. Yesterday, there was 1,549 bills that were put on notice. So in 3-4 weeks time, so it's drinking water out of a fire hose right now. So but let me give you these bullet points here. The mental well-being of youth in our state has become an even more important issue in recent years. We're all well aware of the challenges and the learning loss in the pandemic has caused affecting classrooms across Tennessee, but it has also seen the impacts it had on the mental health of students as well. Here in Tennessee, 1 in 10 children were diagnosed with anxiety and depression in 2020, which represents an 8% increase from 2016, and I'm sure that number is higher than that. Mental health related emergency room visits also rose to 24% for children ages 5 to 11 and 31% for children 12 to 17 years old from March to October of 2020. Additionally, we saw emergency room visits for suspect suicide attempts increase nearly 51% in early 2021 among girls ages 12 to 17 when compared to the same period in 2019. It became very clear that we had to do something as a state to provide additional mental health support for students in our state. So to help address the growing problem, the General Assembly partnered with Governor Lee to create the K-12 Mental Health Trust Fund to provide mental health support to students in primary and secondary schools across our state. The services that will be funded as a result of this $250 million endowment include direct clinical services in schools, mental health awareness and promotion, suicide prevention, post-mention strategies, trauma-informed programs and practices, violence and bullying prevention. The Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse will begin using money from the trust fund, particularly interest gained from the principal in July 2024. However, the interim, we appropriated $6.5 million in new funding last fiscal year to expand mental health services for children and youth. These grant recipients collaborated with community stockholders, including local education authorities and other partners, to design proposals that would have the greatest impact and address outstanding needs. In all, 10 programs were awarded funding. These initiatives increased school-based services and responded to the increasing need for emergency psychiatric services for children and youth. Here in West Tennessee, that included $500,000 to expand observation and consulting services that were previously offered in 20 Head Start centers, 7 emergency departments, and other locations across the region. The grant also adds one new school-based behavioral health liaison and 4 projects to work with community agencies to provide initial assessment, case management, and counseling services. While these programs will provide vital support to children in our region and across our state, we knew that more still needed to be done. That's why the Lee administration and the support of those of us in the General Assembly, Tennessee also set aside $7.6 million to create the Children's Behavioral Health Safety Net. This program is for uninsured children 3 years of age and older who have qualifying mental health diagnosis and without behavioral health insurance. It provides a variety of services such as assessment, evaluation, diagnostic, therapeutic intervention, peer support services, psychosocial rehabilitation services, and psychiatric medication management, among others. We also approved $3 million to expand the school-based behavioral health program. This program provides face-to-face consultation with classroom teachers who will enhance learning environments for children who have or at risk for serious emotional disturbance, behavioral problems, or substance use disorders. With new state funding added in recent years, this program has been expanded into all 95 counties. Additionally, $1 million has been set aside to expand the efforts of the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network, as well as mental health promotion and awareness activities. During the first half of this fiscal year, I'm proud to report that we've seen a 39% increase in the number of student supports that have been put in place when compared to the same point in time last year. In July, the 988 Suicide Crisis Hotline also launched. Now, any Tennessean can call that number and they will be connected with the local call center for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. According to the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory on protecting youth, the number of high school students reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness increased by 40% from 2009 to 2019. Those seriously considering attempting suicide increased by 36%. 988 offers round-the-clock access to trained crisis counselors who can help people experience mental health related to stress. Those include thoughts of suicide, mental health, substance use crisis, or any other kind of emotional distress. People can call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org for themselves, or they are worried about a loved one who may need crisis support. Much like 911 did for emergency services, we believe this number will become a great resource for connecting people to the right treatment at the right time, at the right setting. So those are some of the key things Tennessee has been doing to address children's mental health issues in our state. What's next? Well, in anticipation of funding being made available, K-12 Mental Health Trust Fund, the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services is partnering with the Department of Education and the University of Tennessee College of Social Work to access existing resources and identify needs in communities across the state. This assessment will soon be finalized, and the goal is to create school district profiles which can be used to strategically address gaps. This data will help decide and shape programs and future announcements. On the legislative front this year, the children's mental health continues to be a focus. One piece of legislation that has been filed, House Bill 398, would add that if a child is a delinquent for conduct involving animal abuse or domestic dog or cat, the court must order that child to receive psychiatric or physical, psychological evaluation along with any recommended counseling and treatment. As with addressing learning loss across our state, it is vital that we have the necessary mental health supports available for students as well. If these children do not receive the help they need now, these issues will only get worse. My colleagues and I in the General Assembly are committed to not only providing world-class education for every child in Tennessee, but we're also committed to their physical and mental well-being too. We will continue to work for ways to support children and all of Tennesseans in every possible way. Thank you again for inviting me to be here today, and thank you all for you do for the care of children in Tennessee. And with that said, like I said, I'm no expert, but I know people sitting here. And a lot of things I don't do well. One thing I do well is I work on West Tennessee plan. Our West Tennessee have. Anything that I can do, it's not hesitate. Email, call, come see. Something's on the radar there. We might be able to help you. I'd rather know on the front side of this place. So just know that my door is always open, especially for coming kids. But thank you again for allowing me to be here. I had y'all educated, they learned, public speaking, but I promise next year I'm going to write it back up. But if anybody have any questions, then I can try to answer. Even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Darby. Obviously, the work that you're doing in the General Assembly is great work, and we are not only proud to have you as a representative here in Weasley County, but also Carroll and Henry County, and are grateful for the impact that you're having across the state. Next up, we have got Olivia Abernathy, and I'm trying to get back to my places. Okay, Olivia is doing good work in the area of early education and seeking to ensure that every child in West Tennessee has a bright start. I think I speak for everyone in stating that as we stand with her in that work today, as we have bright hopes for the future of West Tennessee. And because of that, we now will have Olivia come up and talk to us about Bright Start, which is a birth to third grade collective impact initiative designed to improve the outcomes of children in West Tennessee. Olivia asked me not to read her entire bio, but I will tell you she's the director of this early education initiative at United Way of West Tennessee, where she oversees the region's Bright Start Early Education Action Plan. She also serves as a member of the Madison County Commission, and I think that's important to say, because I think that not only the work that she does day in and day out for her real job, but also the work of being engaged in the community is important to recognize, and we need more people like Olivia engaged in that work as well. So please join me in welcoming Olivia Abernathy to the stage.
Thank you so much. We also failed to mention he was a part of our steering committee for the Bright Start plan. So really a lot of the credit goes for him and others in the room. Okay, I want everyone to get out their phone. Some of you have already had phone. We're all working people, but you can take it out of your lap now. And we can look at it. I want you to go to www.brightstartwtn.com. Very glad you all are looking at your phones. My daughter's on my way out the door this morning. One said I looked like George Washington, and the other day I looked like Abraham Lincoln. So, you know, you're getting founding father here today at this legislative forum. So you can look at your phone. I want you to scroll to the bottom, and there is a place to input your email address to subscribe for updates.
Here.
I want you to put your email address in. That way you will get updates from us along the way. There's also a button where you can download our executive summary, and you can download our full action plan. What the Bright Start Tennessee Network is, it's founded by Tennesseans for Quality Early Education as a way to accelerate early learning outcomes and to close achievement gaps among Tennessee's early learners. And so there are 6 participating backbone organizations across the state. Memphis, the work in Memphis is being led by Dr. Candace Thomas's team, who you heard from earlier. The Bright Start fellow there, Corey Strong, I've already learned from him. He's newly brought on to the Bright Start work, and I've learned so much from him already. So I'm sure you'll be hearing more about the work going on in Memphis to come. But unlike Memphis, West Tennessee didn't have an existing action plan around early childhood at all. We did not have a collective impact initiative around early childhood, so we were really starting from scratch. And there are a lot of important people involved in this work. If you were on our steering committee or on our working group, or if you were involved in any of the strategies that are included in the West Tennessee plan, I would love for you to just stand up so that we can acknowledge the work that you put into this as well, because I just get to be the face and come up here and do the speaking part, which is not as fun. Anybody in the room that is involved in the strategy included in front, or on the steering committee, or on the working group. Back there, they're not standing up, I see you. There are a few of you not standing up. But this was a truly collective impact work. We tried really hard to catch up to a lot of our peer regions across the state, and we did that. We were able to launch this plan about a month ago, and I thought we would have maybe 8 or 10 people there. And we had to bring out chairs from the closets. We had close to 150 people there for that launch, and it was a really incredible turnout. What I took from that is that West Tennessee cares about our children. We care about children, we care about the future of this community, and we're hopeful for the future that's ahead. And so you're about to hear from some really incredible people from the Ford Fund. That's one reason why we're excited and we're hopeful about what's to come, is because there's unprecedented investment in this region, and we will capitalize on it. And I said this at the launch, and I'll say it again, I really believe that West Tennessee can become a leader in becoming child and family friendly. I want to make this the most friendly place to raise a child. And I believe that we can do that with all of the people that we have in the room, the experts, the investments that are being made here, and the work that's going on. And so I won't take up any more of their time, but you can download our full action plan there on that website. You can download the executive summary, subscribe for updates, and we want to keep you involved in the work that's going on here with children and youth in West Tennessee. Thank you.
I think I've almost got us back right on time. I'm gonna take all the credit in another way. Next up, we have, I'm sure that none of you all have heard anything about Blue Oval City. It was a joke. Not very funny. I didn't write it, so. But as you know, Blue Oval City and Ford will be the largest automotive assembly plant in the world upon completion. Blue Oval City will have an impact for all of West Tennessee and will transform our region. And Ford is committed to ensure that that transformation is positive and will have a positive impact for all communities and all households. Ford is committed to becoming a part of the West Tennessee family. So today we're joined by a representative of the Ford Motor Company Fund, who will share more with us about the important work in supporting communities. Louisa Shoemaker is the social impact and design leader for Ford Motor Company, where she served as the Ford Fund as the senior manager for essential services. In her role, she focuses on Ford's Detroit and Blue Oval City and global investments in essential services like food access and disaster relief. She is passionate about the mobility and the lifelong road warrior, having spent many years on highways and communities across the U.S. Louisa's human-centered design approach to social impact has contributed to successful initiatives with United Way, Goodwill, Museum School, and Green Path. Her work has been recognized and awarded in numerous global arenas. Most significant is her work writing and facilitating the strategic plan for the creation of the Museum School, winner of a $10 million XQ Super School Project Grant for Education and Innovation. Her design work has been featured at the virtual Burning Man 2020 and recently in a published Zen, Artificial Intelligence for Social Impact. Please join me in welcoming Louisa Shoemaker.
Awesome. It is a pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Louisa Shoemaker. I'm so happy to be here representing Ford Motor Company and the Ford Motor Company Fund, the philanthropic arm of the Ford Motor Company. So I'm actually going to kind of go more into Ford stuff than I am going to go into the philanthropy vein. So as you could hear from my background, I do come from the social impact sector. It has been such an honor and privilege to be in all of y'all's company today. I'm here with my colleague, Eric Davis. He is our Director of Essential Services and Racial Equity, and today has been truly an honor and education to be with you all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share actually the official Blue Oval City Ford Motor Company updates. I'm telling you, it's the freshest PowerPoint presentation. You are the first audience to see this. So So I'm gonna be representing both the Ford Motor Company Fund, but then also the company. So I'm giving you kind of like the Blue Oval City official update right now. So what I'm gonna kind of go through is, what does it mean to lead the electrification revolution? Because Blue Oval City in Haywood County, not too far from here, is going to be building the vehicles of the future in every way. Why are we doing this? Also, kind of what is encompassed in Blue Oval City? Why West Tennessee? A couple of project updates. We are on time and we are pushing to our opening date. Some workforce development. We've talked about workforce development specifically in the context of early childhood development and leaders in that space. And we're going to be talking about workforce development more broadly, and then some of our community-based initiatives and engagement. So leading the EV revolution, this is not an evolution, this is a huge disruption to the automotive industry. And in fact, Ford Motor Company several years ago pivoted from calling ourselves a car company to being a mobility company. So as you are in social impact, you know transportation is one of the most significant barriers that individuals face to access the resources they need. And as we think about energy and different changes that are happening globally, EV is where Ford is moving towards in mobility, and the freedom to move is our charter. So these are just some of the facts around here. Right now, Ford is always happy to say we're number 2 in electrification. We won't name that other electric vehicle company that exists. But we are gaining ground, and we know Blue Oval City and our investments here are going to help us there. We want to be number 1 in electrification in this nation. So where is the electrification happening, and where's our footprint across the United States? So you see right there in the heart, it's Tennessee, Blue Oval City. And we really are throughout the entire Midwest mostly. We are headquartered in Dearborn, Michigan, or Detroit, Michigan, where I reside actually. By the way, I love coming down here so much. The visits here, spending time with Matt Marshall, spending time with the folks in West Tennessee has truly been a joy. And I want to share with you our vision for our involvement here in West Tennessee and Blue Oval City specifically. So a couple of the points. We want to build the future of American manufacturing and the future of mobility here in West Tennessee. We also want to be a good neighbor. We care about that in our hometown of Detroit. We care about that in Cologne, Germany. We care about that in South Africa. We care about it wherever Ford exists, wherever our customers are, and wherever our employees are in the communities that we're in. We also want to develop the next generation of talent. So as I mentioned, I work at Ford Motor Company Fund, the philanthropic arm. I would focus on essential services. That's everything from disaster relief. But we also focus on education and the future of work, as well as social entrepreneurship, the kinds of small businesses that are going to be leading a different kind of change and a different way of operating. We care about economic vibrancy. We care about access and opportunities for all, and we do value protecting and sustaining the environment. So Blue Oval City is comprised of actually a huge campus. It's in Haywood County off 40 Stanton exit. You may be able to see some of the cranes if you're ever kind of going between here and Memphis. And here are some of the components. It is an electric vehicle assembly center. We also are partnering with Blue Oval SK, which is a South Korean battery manufacturer and one of the leaders in that space globally. And then it's also going to feature an on-site supplier park. So we know that sometimes where Ford goes, so do the folks that make tires, so do places that make other kinds of components to reduce travel costs, but then also things that are symbiotic to the mobility space. So what does this mean in terms of the numbers? It means $5.6 billion in investment here in West Tennessee, 6,000 plus new jobs, and 2025 is when the products are going to start coming off the line. And why we chose West Tennessee, not just because it's cool, but it's the site, it's the location. We're talking about building one of the largest manufacturing facilities in North America. We were looking for spots that were shovel ready. We were looking at the financials, of course, and the strength of the workforce and the potential. So a few updates on the construction. If you drive by, you will see the frame is up, concrete has been laid, curbs are going into the roads off the exit. It is really starting to take shape. So, more to come, full completion expected at the end of 2026. Supplier diversity and those who are constructing the Louisville City matters to us immensely. Our main construction lead is Walbridge Construction, and they have led supplier diversity initiatives in Detroit for many decades and have led with that initiative here in West Tennessee with great success. So some of the major milestones, again, we're really going for that 2025 for when that first vehicle comes off the line. And as it relates to workforce development, we have been in lockstep with TCAT since the beginning. Matt Marshall and the United Way of West Tennessee is really kind of, we view them as kind of the best of the best. And it's been an honor to partner with just an incredible team here. Also, we've been on the ground making investments in Memphis. But as far as kind of our footprint of where we view West Tennessee, it's pretty much kind of like the entire west side of the state. Like, we want to invest, we want to connect everywhere from Memphis all the way to the northern interstate border. So as it relates to workforce development, we view that entire region as a workforce development region, recognizing that there are nuances between West Tennessee, the urban center of Memphis, but no matter what, we want to connect opportunity all throughout that region. So we have been partnering with state electeds, different nonprofit organizations, but that work continues. School districts as well. You may have heard of Ford Next Generation Learning. They've been on the ground in Memphis for over 4 years, but we're expanding all of those initiatives to increase access. So a few things on our sustainability footprint about Louisville City. So Bill Ford, Ford is over a 100-year-old company, and it is still connected to the Ford family. In fact, Bill Ford is a huge champion of access, equity, and the environment. And his vision for this Louisville City plant was for it to be a zero waste to landfill facility. This will be the first of its kind in automotive industry. It will be the first of its kind in manufacturing. And then also this notion of making zero freshwater withdrawals for assembly production, also first of its kind in the industry. We have a track record of doing this. Our Ford F-150 is manufactured in a plant that has like a 12-acre green roof on top of it that also grows vegetables. Bill Ford prototyped that over 20 years ago. It remains strong. And he continues to iterate on what it means to be a responsible corporate citizen and what it means to be in relationship with the earth. Other things associated with it, we have also been stewarding and in relationship with the Lone Oaks Farm. So this is one of our biggest investments as it relates to increased environmental stewardship and ongoing learning and development. And then, as I mentioned before, we have been connecting to school districts, the Grizzlies, the Pride Parade, everything from our fund to our marketing department is involved in a number of different initiatives here in West Tennessee. Here on the Ford Fund side of things, we're interested in access and resources. So you will start to see some pilots coming out from us in the coming years as it relates to increasing access, particularly to food and other resources. So for us, that's our charter in the Ford Fund. However, we've got a marketing and sales department who can't wait to support the International Festival in Jackson. We've got other teams who really love teaming up with sports in Memphis. So there's lots of different facets of the company. We're really large and have a lot of passions and interests. But going back to those ones centered around community, stewardship, and accessibility remain at the top of our list. Okay, so these are the links to learn more. And I'm also going to put a QR code up here in just a moment. So feel free to take out your phones. We definitely want to hear from you. We want to hear from you, anything big and small. We know that this is a big investment as well as a big shift as it relates to the electrification elements, as it relates to workforce. So we want to hear from you. Your engagement is critical to us. And then also you can do QR codes if that is your jam. And I'm happy to answer a few questions, if you have any time. Is that all right? Okay. Or comments? Yes.
Discussions. Could you elaborate a little on, the infrastructure around childcare and housing and transportation for these 6,000 workers?
Yes, I'll just tack onto that, this housing too, yes. Childcare, transportation, housing, and recognizing, as I mentioned, that entire region, footprint, basically border to border. We are thinking about mobility solutions for the workforce, for, those who are living in communities that the housing has not built up to meet the demand of where the jobs are. So we are thinking about every single way that we can promote accessibility. I will also add on the mobility element of it. We want to essentially provide the most up-to-date innovation in transportation too. So whether or not that's increasing commuter routes between Memphis and the site, or figuring out different things from like Jackson or Brownsville to just get access to the site for those who are coming for work. That is a top priority. Additionally, we are focused on daycare and solutions around daycare, both on the site as well as increasing that in the region. And then lastly, as it relates to housing, that is something that we care about deeply, and figuring out, kind of how best to approach that. There are a number of different teams who are focused on that, definitely. Anything else? Please, I love questions. Just one more? Yeah. Thank you. Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here today. Pleasure.
Louisa, I will just say that if you ever get featured at non-virtual Burning Man, you can call me. I'm there for it. So, I will also say that the board is obviously committed to this work, but I think we as community participants and also community leaders have to be committed to the work. That the landscape of West Tennessee is going to look much different a decade from now, and that change and that growth can either be driven by us or we can be driven by it. And I think it's incumbent upon us that those of you all that care about this work are really thoughtful about where you plug in and then how you advocate for the work that you're doing with those other decision makers in your local community. So look at me, I got on a soapbox all of a sudden there. So anyways, thank you, Louisa, again for that update. We're proud for the Ford Motor Company to be investing in our community. All right, so the first thing I just want to mention before I bring it up, our last speaker is that I can't miss the opportunity to tell you all today that the University of Tennessee at Martin is celebrating its civil rights conference this entire month of February, and today they are hosting the Civil Rights Community Health Fair in this building. So before you leave, if you have an opportunity, please go down and visit that. Those booths will be happy to see you, and I know if it's anything like every other health fair I've ever been to, there's plenty of free swag there. All right, well, it has been my great pleasure to be with you all this morning. I want to thank you all for being present, either here in person or virtually. It has been my privilege to serve as your MC. I want to now welcome Matt Marshall, the president of United Way of West Tennessee, to offer our closing. Let's give a big round of applause for Matt.
Well, there's no real need to give applause for me, but you can give an applause for all the wonderful speakers we've had today, and for Mayor Bynum, him being our moderator, and even for yourselves for showing up. You guys know that we have not done this for 3 years. This is the first time we were back together in person in 3 years. And for me, that means it's been a lot of chatting in those 3 years. You guys know that. And so I'm just grateful for us that had an opportunity to get everyone back together in a room and virtually, to be able to speak about these very important issues. Now, we had past forums, we did them virtually the last 2 years, and had incredible speakers and incredible participation with those forums as well. But it's something about being in a room. And so, as we get ready to close, I'm not going to keep you long. Olivia got us back on track. But seriously, go get the report. Go look up the work that Olivia's been doing over the past 18 months with various leaders across the region. Some exciting things on the horizon. Well, Kylie shared with us about the huge challenges impacting our children across the state, the prevalence of youth depressive episodes and how the pandemic increased those rates, but also that impact and how it's affecting maternal mortality rates, teen birth rates, and child welfare challenges that we have as well. Alice will share with us about employee-related stressors. She mentioned a couple of times our fitting 10 hours of meetings into 6. How many of you, especially our virtual attendees, were multitasking even during this morning? Watching, but only partially listening. How many of us are doing the same thing in our homes? Raising our kids, watching, only partially listening. During the panel, we were challenged to ask the questions, what do the families that live in our communities need to break the cycles to complex grief and trauma? What barriers exist that are keeping them from getting what they need? And what policies do we need to put into place to eliminate those barriers? Such as making sure we have the right reimbursement processes in place and that we're paying an adequate wage for professionals in the mental health space. Representative Darby shared with us about new government initiatives aimed at providing more resources across the state. And again, Olivia very briefly provided updates about Bright Start West Tennessee, a collective impact strategic plan aimed at increasing access to high quality early education environments and strengthening long-term outcomes. And then Louisa just shared with us about these exciting work happening around Fort Blue Oval City and how Fort aims to help West Tennessee reach new heights. So yes, to all of our presenters and analysts, when you saw me sitting back there on my phone, I was actually taking notes, not texting. But I want to close with my own story very quickly, because as Allison shared, it's very easy to get caught up in all of the data and the facts and the numbers and to disassociate those from the people. Well, many of you know that I have an ACE score of 5. A few weeks ago, Katie and I were attending the AIM High Tennessee Board retreat together over in Murfreesboro. And for an hour before dinner, she and I had this conversation when I showed up to dinner. But for an hour before dinner, I had been on the phone talking with my big sister about her childhood. And when I left dinner, I called her back and we talked for 2 hours more about trauma. You see, my father had been getting chemotherapy treatments last summer at Vanderbilt. And I went to spend a week with him through those treatments during the toughest part. And during that period of time, he and I had very real and honest conversations about the past. Now, thankfully, my father went through a lot of that years ago. So it wasn't a lot of pain as much anymore associated with it, but there were still things that need to be discussed. And one of the things that I said to him during that week that I've never said before is, Dad, one thing that I realized now, is that during a large portion of that time, you yourself were hurt. You yourself were going through depression and pain. You never thought, I know you well enough to know, you never expected to get a divorce. You never expected to have to raise a broken family. And I could see it in his eyes. He couldn't, my dad's pretty strong. He just said, Yeah. So my sisters, we sat on the phone that night for 3 hours, talking through all these struggles and how so many decisions that we've made in our lives up until this point as adults were impacted by decisions that were made for us as children. And that now here we are raising our own kids, trying not to repeat those mistakes. And so it's hard. All of us in this room relate to that in some way or another. It's either us or it's someone we know. And all of us in this room very often do this as a profession. This is the water we drink every day. It was said earlier, we do it often without breaks, without opportunities to actually have those moments of introspection, to examine where we are. Just yesterday, I heard Lisa Piercy down in Jackson during the West Star event. She just stepped down as Commissioner of Health just a few months ago. And she talked about how over the past 3 years during the pandemic, we've seen this massive exodus from the healthcare field. And so many people think that that was about politics. And she said, no, that's not what it was about. It was about mental health. Because you had nurses and doctors and others who are in these settings, and they're literally having patients die every day. 3 to 4 people a shift. And that used to be 3 or 4 a month, and it's 3 or 4 a shift. And they just have to keep going. They just have to keep working. And again, going back to what Allison said, that's where many of us find ourselves. I said to someone just this morning, 2023 has been nonstop. It's just one thing after another. And everyone I'm speaking with is saying the same thing. So as I close, that's what's on my mind. That we all have to be willing at some point to stop. Just take a pause for our own mental health. Because I promise you, you know this yourselves. We can't care for our little ones. We don't care for ourselves. You guys know the example that we always give in this field. Who do you put the oxygen mask on first? Yourself. Because if you can't breathe, you can't take care of them. And we all have to be willing to stop. And again, I want to go back to what I said at the very beginning. My wife is watching this call right now. She's on the Zoom. And she and I sit and we have conversations in our own home about the need to just stop sometimes and watch and listen, even to our own kids. And so, Proverbs 21, 1-5 says, my child, listen to me and treasure my instructions. Tune your ears to wisdom and concentrate on understanding. Cry out for insight and understanding. Search for them as you would for lost money or hidden treasure. And I remind you all this morning, even as we heard over and over again, that our children are crying out. But are we listening? So I want to encourage each one of us as we go. Again, slow down, watch, and listen. As practitioners, as leaders, as legislators, as parents, as family members, as friends, as neighbors. Will we commit? It's just February. It's just February. Will we commit in 2023 to exercise some of the demons of the pandemic and say, no, I'm going to slow back down? Because that's what's best for my mental health And that's what's best for the mental health of my community. I pray that as we leave here today, that we would commit to that. Because it's only in doing that that we ultimately will produce the outcomes that our children, our families, and our communities. Thank you again for being here today. Thank you to all of our incredible speakers, to our panelists, to all of you. Again, I want to say thank you. Thank you to those who virtually attended. And I hope for those of you watching in TV land, that next year we'll have an even bigger turnout in person. This is a big turnout. You're not here. We got 150 people in the room. But I want to get back to where we have 300 in the room. Because again, there's something about that human connection that you can't get over a screen. And if we can't keep telling our kids to put down the phones and put down the devices while they're staying in our kids. So again, grateful for all of you being here. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and a great weekend. And let's stop, watch, and listen in 2023. Thank you. One more thing, I'm sorry. And it's sitting right here in front of me. You may be asking what next. You may be asking, okay, what next? We provide you this one pager to take with you. These are some policy priorities that we want you to look over and consider. These are needs within our state. This is not everything. There are others, but these are some priorities, okay? If you're virtual, we're gonna send these out to you. We're gonna email these to you if you signed up. So you'll get a copy of this too, as well. We're also gonna send you the PowerPoints, and other types of things too, so you have that. But look, there's a lot of work to get done. Here's some places to start, okay? Thank you, guys.
Good.